I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. The muddy footprints led straight to my bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the trail of brown smears marring the otherwise pristine hardwood floor. They hadn't been there when I'd gone to bed, which could only mean one thing. Someone had been in the house while I slept. It had all started 3 days ago, when my cousin Amy asked if I could house sit for her. She and her husband were taking a much-needed vacation, leaving their sprawling country home empty for 2 weeks. "It'll be a nice break for you too, Liz," Amy had said. "Just you and nature. No noisy neighbors, no traffic. Pure peace and quiet. Peace and quiet." Right. If only she knew. The first night had been uneventful enough. I'd arrived late in the afternoon, familiarizing myself with the house's layout and settling into the guest bedroom. As darkness fell, I'd curled up on the couch with a book, enjoying the silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind through the trees. But as the night wore on, I found myself growing uneasy. The house was so quiet, so isolated. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and the property was surrounded by dense woods. I wasn't used to such profound silence. In my small city apartment, there was always some ambient noise. Traffic, neighbors, the hum of electronics. Here, the silence pressed in on me, making every little creak of the house sound thunderous. I shook off the feeling, chiding myself for being silly. This was exactly what I needed. A break from the constant noise and stress of city life. I was just adjusting to the quiet, that's all. Still, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked before heading to bed that night. The second day passed quietly. I spent most of it exploring the property, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the vibrant colors of the changing leaves. But as evening approached, that nagging sense of unease returned. I found myself constantly glancing out the windows, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Just after sunset, I heard it, a soft crunch of gravel from the driveway. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again. Footsteps. My heart racing, I crept to the window and peered out. In the fading light, I could just make out a figure standing at the edge of the driveway, partially obscured by an old oak tree. They were perfectly still, facing the house. Watching me, I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. What should I do? Call the police, but what would I tell them? I'd seen someone standing in the driveway. They hadn't done anything threatening. Not yet, anyway. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just a neighbor stopping by to check on the place. That had to be it. Amy hadn't mentioned any neighbors, but surely there must be some nearby. Steeling my nerves, I flicked on the porch light and opened the front door. "Hello?" I called out. "Can I help you?" Silence. The driveway was empty. A chill ran down my spine. Had I imagined it? I could have sworn I'd seen someone there. I scanned the property, squinting into the gathering darkness, but saw no sign of movement. Unsettled, I went back inside, double-checking that all the doors and windows were securely locked. I tried to distract myself with TV, but found myself obsessively peeking out the windows every few minutes. The vast, empty darkness seemed to press in on all sides, full of unknown threats. Sleep was fitful that night. Every creak of the old house jolted me awake. Twice, I could have sworn I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I gathered the courage to look, there was nothing there. By morning, I was a nervous wreck. Lack of sleep and paranoia had me jumping at every sound. I seriously considered calling Amy and making up some excuse to leave early. But I didn't want to ruin her vacation over what was probably just my overactive imagination. I spent most of the day inside, too unnerved to venture out onto the grounds. As night approached once again, my anxiety ratcheted up to new heights. I found myself huddled on the couch, every light in the house blazing, desperately trying to convince myself that I was safe. That's when I saw it. A face pressed against the living room window. Pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where the eyes should be. Our gazes locked for a heart-stopping moment before the figure darted away. I screamed, scrambling off the couch and backing away from the window. This wasn't in my head. This was real. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "There's someone outside my house," I babbled to the dispatcher. I saw them looking in the window. "Please, you have to send someone." "Ma'am, what's your location?" the calm voice asked. I rattled off the address, my eyes darting between the windows, terrified of seeing that face again. "All right, we have officers en route to you now. They should be there in about 20 minutes. In the meantime, I want you to find a secure room and lock yourself inside. Can you do that for me?" I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. "Yes," I managed to choke out. "Good. Stay on the line with me until the officers arrive, okay?" I clutched the phone like a lifeline as I made my way to the master bedroom. It was the only room without windows on the ground floor. I locked the door behind me, then wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. The wait for the police was agonizing. Every creak and groan of the house had me convinced the intruder was inside. When I finally heard a knock at the front door and a male voice calling out police, I nearly wept with relief. I let the officers in, babbling my story as they performed a thorough search of the house and surrounding property. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been there at all. "Are you sure about what you saw, miss?" one of the officers asked gently. Sometimes our eyes can play tricks on us, especially when we're alone in an unfamiliar place. I wanted to scream in frustration. I knew what I'd seen, but doubt began to creep in. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the stress and lack of sleep had gotten to me. The officers left after taking my statement, promising to keep an eye on the property. I was left alone once again, feeling foolish and on edge. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the living room, lights blazing, jumping at every sound. By morning, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. I drifted into an uneasy sleep on the couch, too tired to keep my eyes open any longer. When I jolted awake, watery daylight was filtering through the windows. I blinked, disoriented, trying to remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The face at the window, calling the police, the sleepless night. I scrubbed at my face, feeling grimy and on edge. A shower, that's what I needed. Something to wash away the stress and paranoia of the past few days. I made my way to the bathroom, pointedly not looking out any of the windows as I passed. The hot water felt heavenly, soothing my frayed nerves. For a few blissful minutes, I let myself relax, push away the fear and tension. But as I stepped out of the shower, wrapping myself in a fluffy towel, that sense of unease came crashing back. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I crept to the bathroom door, pressing my ear against it. The house was silent. Holding my breath, I eased the door open and peeked out into the hallway. That's when I saw them. Muddy footprints, trucking through the house, leading straight to my bedroom door. My blood ran cold as I stared at the brown smears marring the hardwood floor. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. But when I opened them again, the footprints were still there. Wet, undeniable proof that someone or something had been in the house while I showered. My mind raced. What should I do? Call the police again? But would they even believe me this time? And what if whoever left those footprints was still in the house? I stood frozen in the hallway, paralyzed by indecision and fear. The silence of the house pressed in around me, broken only by the pounding of my heart. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, my wet hair whipping across my face. The hallway behind me was empty, but I could have sworn. Another creak, this time from the direction of the living room. Panic surged through me. One had to get out of here. Now, I bolted for the front door, not caring that I was still in just a towel. I'd rather face the embarrassment of running outside half naked than stay in this house a second longer. I yanked open the front door and froze. There, on the porch, stood a figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. And those eyes, black, empty voids that seemed to draw me in. It smiled, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. I screamed. The creature lunged forward, inhumanly fast. I felt a sharp pain in my arm as its claws raked across my skin. Instinct took over, and I slammed the door shut, barely missing its grasping hands. I ran blindly through the house, searching for a way out. But every window I tried to open was stuck fast. Every door I attempted to unlock refused to budge. The thing was inside now. I could hear it moving through the house, letting out a low, guttural growl that made my blood run cold. As I backed into a corner of the living room, my eyes fell on my phone, still sitting on the coffee table. If I could just reach it, call for help. The creature appeared in the doorway, blocking my escape. Its lipless mouth stretched into a mockery of a smile as it advanced towards me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. The shrill ring of a phone cut through the air. My eyes snapped open. Sunlight streamed through the windows. I was on the couch, my phone buzzing on the coffee table in front of me. With shaking hands, I answered it. "Hello, hey there." Amy's cheery voice came through the speaker. "Just wanted to check in and see how everything's going. You doing okay?" I looked around the quiet, sunlit living room. No muddy footprints. No monsters. Just the peaceful farmhouse, exactly as it had been when I arrived. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "Everything's fine." But as I said it, my eyes were drawn to the window, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a pale face watching me from the edge of the woods. Story 2. The first scream pierced the night air, just as I saw the hooded figures emerge from the cornfield. My wife Sarah clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Oh God, Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What have we stumbled into?" I wish I knew. What I did know was that we were stranded on a deserted stretch of highway, miles from anywhere, with something terrifying unfolding before our eyes. It had started as a simple road trip. Sarah and I were driving cross-country to visit her parents, taking the scenic route through rural back roads. We'd been enjoying the drive, windows down, music playing, sharing stories and laughs. It was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to make memories before settling into the routine of suburban life and starting a family. Now, as I watched more robed figures materialize from the darkness, I wondered if we'd live to see morning. The trouble began just after sunset. We were somewhere in the Midwest. I couldn't even tell you which state anymore. Miles of cornfields stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or barn. We hadn't passed another car in over an hour. Maybe we should find somewhere to stop for the night, Sarah suggested, stifling a yawn. I'm getting kind of creeped out by how empty it is out here. I nodded, feeling the fatigue of hours behind the wheel. Yeah, good idea. There's got to be a town coming up soon, right? As if on cue, the car gave a sudden lurch. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. No, I muttered, guiding the rapidly slowing vehicle to the shoulder. Come on, don't do this to me. But it was no use. The car rolled to a stop, leaving us stranded in the gathering darkness. I popped the hood, hoping against hope it was something simple I could fix. But as soon as I lifted it, I knew we were in trouble. Even in the dim light, I could see that something had ruptured in the engine, spraying fluid everywhere. How bad is it? Sarah asked, coming to stand beside me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Bad. We're not going anywhere tonight. Sarah bit her lip, glancing up and down the empty highway. So what do we do? I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd find. No signal. Of course. I guess we wait, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Someone's bound to come along eventually, right? Sarah nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We climbed back into the car, locking the doors. An uneasy silence fell over us as we peered out into the darkness. That's when we saw the lights. At first, I thought it was another car approaching, but as I watched, I realized the lights were too low to the ground and moving in erratic patterns. They bobbed and weaved through the cornfield, parallel to the road, like fireflies on steroids. What is that? Sarah whispered, leaning forward in her seat. I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the strange spectacle. I don't know. Farmers, maybe. Or kids playing some kind of game. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was something unnatural about those lights, something that sent a chill down my spine. As we watched, transfixed, the lights began to converge. They gathered in a clearing just visible from the road, forming a large circle. And then, one by one, they winked out. For a moment, all was still. Then a new light bloomed in the center of the circle, a bonfire leaping to life with unnatural speed. In the flickering firelight, I could make out shapes. People, dozens of them, all wearing long hooded robes. They stood motionless around the fire, facing inward. Jack, Sarah's voice was barely audible. What's going on? I shook my head, unable to form words. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Any minute now, I'd wake up and realize this was all some bizarre dream brought on by too many hours on the road. But I didn't wake up. And what happened next was all too real. A figure stepped into the center of the circle. Even from this distance, I could tell they were different from the others. Their robe was a deep crimson, standing out starkly against the sea of black-clad figures. They raised their arms, and a hush fell over the gathering, and then the chanting began. It started low, barely audible over the crackling of the fire, but it grew steadily louder, a rhythmic drone in a language I didn't recognize. The sound seemed to fill the air, pressing in on us from all sides. Sarah whimpered beside me, pressing herself against my side. I wrapped an arm around her, my eyes still glued to the scene before us. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and then abruptly stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. The red-robed figure lowered their arms, and two of the black-robed figures stepped forward. Between them, they half dragged, half carried something. No, someone. Even from this distance, I could see the figure struggling against their captors. "Oh God," Sarah gasped. "We have to do something. We have to help them." I gripped the door handle, every instinct screaming at me to run, to help, to do something. But fear kept me rooted to the spot. What could we do against so many? We'd only end up captured ourselves. The captive was brought to the center of the circle, forced to their knees before the red-robed figure. The firelight glinted off something in the leader's hand. A knife, its blade wickedly curved. That's when the first scream tore through the night. Sarah buried her face in my shoulder, unable to watch. But I couldn't look away. The knife flashed, and the scream cut off abruptly. The chanting resumed, louder and more frenzied than before. The black-robed figures swayed in place, their voices rising and falling in a horrifying rhythm. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The chanting stopped, the fire died down to embers, and the robed figures began to disperse. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." Sarah nodded frantically, her face pale in the dim light. I turned the key in the ignition, praying for a miracle. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. I didn't question our sudden good fortune. I threw the car into gear and peeled out onto the highway, tires squealing on the asphalt. We'd gone maybe half a mile when I saw the flashing lights in the rearview mirror. Red and blue, a police car. Relief flooded through me. We were saved. We could tell the police what we'd seen, led them back to the site of the ritual. Justice would be served. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I rolled down the window. The officer approached, his flashlight beam momentarily blinding me. "Evening, folks," he said, his voice friendly enough. "Everything all right? You were going awful fast back there." I opened my mouth to explain, to pour out the whole terrifying story. But the words died in my throat as the beam of the flashlight illuminated the officer's face. It was the same face I'd seen in the center of that circle, holding the curved knife. "Is there a problem?" The officer, the cult leader, asked, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I swallowed hard, feeling Sarah's hand gripping my arm tight enough to leave bruises. "No," I managed to croak out. "No problem, officer. Just eager to get to our hotel." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I see. Well, these roads can be dangerous at night. Lots of deer, you know. You'll want to be more careful." I nodded mutely. "You folks enjoy your evening now," he said, stepping back from the car. "And do be careful. You never know what's out there in the dark." As he walked back to his patrol car, I could feel the weight of his gaze on us. I didn't breathe easy until his taillights had disappeared into the distance. "Jack," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do?" I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "We drive," I said. "We drive, and we don't stop until we're far away from here." As I pressed down on the accelerator, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd brushed up against something ancient and terrible. Something that wouldn't let us go so easily. In the rearview mirror, I could see pinpricks of light appearing in the fields behind us. bobbing, weaving, drawing closer. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. Story 3. The howl that echoed through the forest didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was primal, guttural, and terrifyingly close. I exchanged glances with my 3 friends, huddled around our hastily rebuilt campfire, and saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. Whatever was out there in the darkness, stalking us through the snow-covered woods, it wasn't natural, and we were a long way from help. It had started as a routine winter camping trip, just for friends looking to escape the city for a weekend, enjoy some crisp mountain air, and maybe do a bit of skiing. Mark, Sarah, Dave, and I had been planning this getaway for months. We were experienced campers, well prepared for the cold and snow. Or so we thought. The first day had gone smoothly enough. We'd hiked deep into the wilderness, found a picturesque clearing to set up camp, and spent the afternoon exploring the surrounding area. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and passing around a flask of whiskey to ward off the chill. It wasn't until the next morning that things started to get weird. I was the first one up, crawling out of my tent into the grey pre-dawn light. The world was silent, muffled by a thick blanket of fresh snow that must have fallen overnight. I stretched, my breath fogging in the frigid air, and that's when I saw them. Tracks, dozens of them, circling our campsite. At first, I thought they might be deer tracks, but as I looked closer, my blood ran cold. These weren't the delicate prints of a deer or any other animal I recognized. They were huge, easily twice the size of my own boot print, with long, sharp claw marks extending from each toe. "Guys!" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "You need to see this." One by one, my friends emerged from their tents, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their drowsy complaints died on their lips as they saw what I was staring at. "What the hell made those?" Dave asked, his face pale. Mark shook his head, crouching down to examine one of the prints more closely. "I've never seen anything like this. Mountain lion, maybe, but they're way too big." Sarah, always the practical one, was already moving. "Whatever it is, I don't think we should stick around to find out. Let's pack up and get out of here." We all nodded in agreement, the eerie silence of the forest suddenly oppressive. As we started to break down the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We worked quickly, eager to put some distance between us and whatever had been stalking our camp during the night. But as we shouldered our packs and prepared to leave, Mark suddenly froze, staring off into the trees. "Did you guys see that?" he whispered. We all turned to look. At first, I saw nothing but the endless white of snow-covered pines. Then, just for a second, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something large and dark, slipping between the trees. "Go," I said, my voice tight with fear. Now, we set off at a brisk pace, following our tracks from the day before. The snow made the going tough, each step requiring extra effort. Every few minutes, one of us would glance back, searching for any sign of pursuit. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when Dave suddenly stopped short. "Guys," he said, his voice shaking. "Look!" He was pointing at our trail behind us, or rather, where our trail should have been. The tracks we'd made coming up to our campsite, the ones we'd been following back, had vanished. In their place was a smooth, unbroken expanse of snow. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. "How can our tracks just disappear?" As if in answer, another howl split the air. Closer this time. Much closer. Run, Mark yelled, and we didn't need to be told twice. We plunged through the snow, all thoughts of following a trail forgotten in our panic. Branches whipped at our faces as we crashed through the underbrush, the sound of our ragged breathing loud in my ears. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless white landscape. But eventually, gasping and exhausted, we had to stop. I think we lost it, Dave panted, bent over with his hands on his knees. I wanted to believe him, but as we stood there, trying to catch our breath, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. "Guys," I said slowly, "do you hear that?" They all fell silent, listening, and that's when it hit us. There was no sound, no wind in the trees, no birds, no scurrying of small animals. Nothing. The forest was as silent as a tomb. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, a tremor in her voice. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but everything looked the same. Endless trees, endless snow. We were hopelessly lost. Let's just pick a direction and keep moving," Mark suggested. "We're bound to hit a road or a trail eventually, right?" It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. So we started walking again, slower this time, conserving our energy. As the day wore on, the sky began to darken. Whether it was night falling or storm clouds rolling in, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that the thought of being out here in the dark, with that thing hunting us, was terrifying. "We need to find shelter," I said, eyeing the darkening sky. "We can't be out in the open when night falls." The others nodded grimly. We were all thinking the same thing. If we didn't find somewhere safe soon, we might not survive the night. It was Sarah who spotted the cave. Just a dark opening in a rocky hillside, but it was the first sign of potential shelter we'd seen all day. "It's not ideal," she said, "but it's better than being out in the open." We approached cautiously. Mark pulled out a flashlight and shone it into the cave mouth. The beam illuminated rough stone walls, extending back into darkness. "I don't see any signs of animals," he reported. "I think it's empty." We filed into the cave, relieved to be out of the oppressive silence of the forest. It wasn't much, but at least we had walls at our back now. "Okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's get a fire going. It'll keep us warm and hopefully keep any animals away." We set to work, gathering what dry wood we could find near the cave entrance. Soon, we had a small fire crackling, pushing back the shadows and offering a modicum of comfort. As we huddled around the fire, the events of the day started to catch up with us. We were exhausted, scared, and no closer to finding our way out of this nightmare. "What are we going to do?" Dave asked, his voice small. Before anyone could answer, that bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest again. We all stiffened, eyes darting to the cave entrance. It was close. Too close. Maybe. "Maybe it won't find us in here," Sarah whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. We sat in tense silence, straining our ears for any sound of approach. Minutes ticked by, each feeling like an eternity. Then we heard it, the crunch of snow under heavy feet just outside our cave. Mark motioned for us to stay quiet, slowly reaching for a heavy branch we'd gathered for firewood. I followed suit, my hand closing around a fist-sized rock. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. Something large, moving with an unnatural grace, began to step into view. And then, suddenly, a new sound cut through the night, a mechanical worry, growing louder by the second. Lights flashed outside the cave, and the shadow at the entrance retreated with inhuman speed. "Hello," a voice called out. "Is anyone there?" We looked at each other in disbelief. Could it really be here? I shouted, my voice cracking. "We're in here." Moments later, a figure appeared at the cave entrance. A park ranger, looking equally surprised to see us. "Thank God," he said, taking in our bedraggled appearance. "We've been searching for you all day. Your families reported you missing when you didn't check in. Are you folks all right?" We stumbled out of the cave, babbling our story to the bewildered ranger. As he led us to his snowmobile, I couldn't help but look back at the dark forest behind us. For just a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes gleaming in the darkness. But then they were gone, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. As we sped away towards safety, leaving the silent forest behind, one thought kept running through my mind. What if it followed us out? Story 4. The file slipped from my trembling hands, its contents scattering across the dusty floor. My flashlight beam danced wildly over the pages, illuminating fragments of text. Patient 23. Extreme aggression. Experimental treatment. Terminated. As the words sank in, a distant scream echoed through the abandoned asylum's halls. I realized with growing horror that I was no longer alone in this place. And whatever was here with me, it wasn't human. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When I took the job as a night security guard at the old Ravenswood Asylum, I thought it would be easy money. Just patrol an empty building, make sure no teenagers broke in looking for thrills. The place had been abandoned for decades, its dark history forgotten by most. But from the moment I first stepped inside, something felt off. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the very walls were saturated with the suffering that had occurred here. I tried to shake it off, tell myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an old building, nothing more. My first few shifts passed uneventfully. I'd make my rounds, flashlight in hand, trying to ignore the way shadows seemed to move in my peripheral vision. The creaks and groans of the old structure settling kept me on edge, but I was starting to get used to it. Then came the night everything changed. I was about halfway through my shift, walking down the East Wing corridor. My footsteps echoed off the peeling walls, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. As I passed the old nurse's station, I heard it. A soft thud, like something heavy falling to the floor, coming from one of the rooms further down the hall. I froze, listening intently. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, another thud, followed by what sounded like scratching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. "Is someone there? This is security? You're trespassing on private property?" No response. Just more scratching, more insistent now. Every instinct told me to turn around, to call for backup. But I was the only one here, and it was my job to investigate. Swallowing hard, I started moving towards the sound. As I drew closer, I could make out which room it was coming from. Room 237. The door was ajar, swaying slightly as if moved by an unfelt breeze. The scratching had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A low, rhythmic sound. Almost like breathing. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, shining my flashlight into the darkness beyond. The beam illuminated a scene of chaos. Overturned furniture, shredded papers covering the floor, deep gouges in the walls. And there, huddled in the far corner, was a figure. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't be in here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The figure didn't move. Didn't even seem to breathe. It was unnaturally still, almost as if, suddenly, its head snapped up. I caught a glimpse of wild, feral eyes, gleaming in the flashlight beam. Then it moved, faster than anything I'd ever seen, lunging straight at me. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut, just as the thing crashed into it from the other side. The impact shook the entire frame, dust raining down from the ceiling. I held the door closed with all my strength as the creature on the other side clawed and pounded, shrieking in a way that sounded barely human. After what felt like an eternity, the assault stopped. I stood there, heart pounding, straining to hear any sound from the other side of the door. Nothing, just silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, pressed against that door. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep wariness. I needed to call for help, to get out of here. But my radio was in the security office, 2 floors down. Gathering what courage I had left, I began to make my way back. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every sound making me jump. I was nearly to the stairwell when I saw it. A door hidden behind a stack of old gurneys. A door I'd never noticed before in all my patrols. I should have kept going. Should have headed straight for my radio, for help. But curiosity, that damned curiosity, got the better of me. I moved the gurneys aside and tried the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. The room beyond was small, lined with filing cabinets. A thick layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for years. Until now. There, on a desk in the center of the room, was a file. Open, as if someone had just been reading it. I approached cautiously, shining my flashlight on the yellowed pages. As I read, my blood ran cold. The file detailed experiments conducted right here in Ravenswood. Experiments on patients, using treatments that could only be described as torture. And the results were horrifying. That's when I heard the scream. When the file slipped from my hands, scattering its terrible secrets across the floor. When I realized that the creatures from these experiments, they were still here, still alive, and now they were awake. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning as I tore down the hallways. I could hear them now, inhuman shrieks and pounding footsteps echoing from all directions. They were hunting me. I burst into the security office, slamming the door behind me and wedging a chair under the handle. My hands shook as I grabbed the radio, frantically calling for help. This is Ravenswood Security. I need immediate assistance. There's something in here. Something. The radio crackled, cutting me off. A voice came through, distorted by static. This is dispatch. Please repeat your last. Over. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This is Thomas Hayes, night security at Ravenswood Asylum. There are intruders in the building, possibly violent. I need police assistance immediately. There was a long pause. Then, I'm sorry, sir. Did you say Ravenswood Asylum? Yes. I nearly shouted. Yes, I'm the night guard here. Please, you have to send someone. Another pause. When the voice came back, it was hesitant, confused. Sir? Ravenswood Asylum was demolished 5 years ago. There's nothing there but an empty lot. The radio slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. That wasn't possible. I was here, right now. I could see the room around me, feel the solid desk under my hands. A pounding at the door snapped me back to reality. The chair was shuddering under the impact of something large and powerful. I backed away, looking desperately for a way out. The window. It was my only chance. I grabbed a chair, smashing it against the glass. It spider-webbed, but held. Behind me, I could hear the door beginning to splinter. Another swing. Cracks spread further. The door groaned, with shrieking as it tore. With a final, desperate heave, the window shattered. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of freedom. I didn't hesitate, diving through the opening just as the door burst open behind me. I hit the ground hard, glass shards biting into my palms. But I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed on a patch of overgrown grass. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I finally looked back and froze. Where the imposing structure of Ravenswood Asylum should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. No building, no broken window, no sign that anything had ever stood there at all. I stared, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It wasn't possible. I'd been there, felt it, smelled it. The files, the creature, it had all been real, hadn't it? As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I slowly got to my feet. My uniform was torn and dirty, hands cut from the glass, but there was no asylum, no monsters, just me, standing alone in an empty field. I started walking, not sure where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to get far away from this place. But with each step, a nagging doubt grew in the back of my mind. Had it all been in my head? Or was I just another victim of Ravenswood's dark legacy, doomed to relive its horrors night after night? As I reached the road, I realized with growing dread that I might never know the truth. And somewhere behind me, in a place that no longer existed, I could have sworn I heard a distant, inhuman howl. Story 5. The moment my hand touched the cold metal of the hidden door handle, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. A jolt of energy surged through me, carrying with it a flood of whispered voices and flashes of unspeakable rituals. As the door creaked open, revealing the darkness beyond, my wife Emma's excited gasp turned into a choked scream. The stench of decay and something far worse billowed out, along with the certainty that we had just unleashed something that should have remained. Buried in the walls of our new home, we'd been so excited when we found the house. It was a beautiful, Victorian, all intricate woodwork and stained glass windows. Going for a song because it needed some TLC, as the realtor put it. Emma and I had always dreamed of restoring an old home, making it our own. This felt like fate. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of cleaning, painting, and planning renovations. We'd laugh about the house's quirks, the way certain floorboards creaked, or how the lights would sometimes flicker for no apparent reason. We called it character, if only we'd known. It was Emma who found the first clue. She was stripping wallpaper in what we planned to make the nursery when her scraper hit something solid behind the floral print. "Jack!" she called out, excitement in her voice. "Come look at this." I hurried upstairs, finding her running her hands over a small section of bare wall. "There's something here," she said, tapping the spot. "It sounds hollow." Curious, I pressed my ear to the wall. She was right. There was definitely a space behind it. "Maybe it's an old chimney," I suggested. "Or just a quirk of the construction." Emma shook her head, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of discovery. "No, look." She pointed to a faint line in the plaster, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. It formed a perfect rectangle, about the size of a door. "I think there's a room back there," she said. "A hidden room." We spent the rest of the day carefully removing the remaining wallpaper and probing the edges of the mysterious rectangle. By evening, we'd managed to find a subtle catch mechanism. With a soft click, a panel swung open, revealing a dark space beyond. The musty smell of long, undisturbed air wafted out. I pulled out my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a small room, maybe 6 feet square. It was empty, save for a sturdy wooden chest against the far wall. "Oh my God," Emma breathed, peering around me. "This is incredible. Why would someone seal up a room like this?" I stepped inside cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The chest drew me like a magnet. It was old, the wood dark with age, intricate carvings covering its surface. Scenes of figures in robes, gathering around altars, performing what looked like rituals. "Should we open it?" Emma asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. I hesitated. Something about this felt wrong. Why hide a room and then hide a chest inside it? But curiosity won out. "Together," I said, grasping one side of the heavy lid. Emma nodded, taking the other side. We lifted, hinges protesting after years of disuse. As the lid raised, that's when I felt it. A surge of something, energy, electricity. I can't describe it. But in that moment, I knew we'd made a mistake. The chest was full of papers, yellowed with age, covered in spidery handwriting and strange symbols. Tucked among them were objects: a curved knife with a bone handle, a small leather-bound book, a silver amulet on a chain. "Jack," Emma's voice shook as she lifted one of the papers. "Look at this." It was a photograph, brown with age. It showed a group of people in dark robes, standing in a circle. In the center was an altar, and on it, I felt my gorge rise. The image was grainy, indistinct, but what lay on that altar was clearly not animal. "We need to call the police," I said, my mouth dry. Emma nodded, her face pale. What do you think happened here?" Before I could answer, a gust of wind rushed through the room, cold and damp and smelling of earth and decay. The papers in the chest rustled, and I could have sworn I heard whispers, just on the edge of hearing. And then the lights went out. Emma screamed, and I felt her grab my arm. I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn the flashlight back on. It flickered weakly, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. "Let's get out of here," I said, tugging Emma towards the door. But as we turned, my blood ran cold. The door was closed. "I don't understand." Emma's voice was high with panic. "How did it close? There's no breeze in here." I reached for the door, my hand closing around the handle. It was ice cold, so cold it burned. I yanked my hand back with a yelp. "Jack." "What's wrong?" "The handle," I gasped. "It's freezing." As if in response, a low moan echoed through the tiny room. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice filled with pain and hunger and something inhuman. Emma whimpered, pressing herself against me. "What was that, Jack? What's happening?" I wished I had an answer for her. All I knew was that we needed to get out, now. Gritting my teeth, I grabbed the door handle again, ignoring the biting cold. I pulled with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The moaning grew louder, seeming to come from all around us. The temperature in the room plummeted, our breath fogging in the air. And then, by the weak light of my phone, I saw them. Shadows moving across the walls. Not cast by anything, but living shadows, writhing and twisting into horrific shapes. Faces emerged from the darkness, mouths opened in silent screams. Emma saw them too. She buried her face in my chest, her whole body shaking. "Make it stop," she sobbed. "Please, make it stop." I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but I knew it was useless. We were alone in this house, and whatever we'd unleashed, it was angry. The shadows were growing more solid, reaching out towards us with grasping hands. The moaning had become a chorus, a cacophony of tormented voices that seemed to burrow into my skull. And then, cutting through it all, a new sound. A baby's cry. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, unable to speak. It was impossible. We didn't have a baby. We'd only just started trying. But there it was again, the unmistakable wail of an infant in distress. "We have to help it," Emma cried, pulling away from me. "Emma, no!" I grabbed for her, but she slipped from my grasp, moving towards the source of the crying. As she approached the far corner of the room, the shadows parted. There, cradled in darkness, was a bundle of cloth. It squirmed, the crying growing louder. "Oh, you poor thing," Emma cooed, reaching for the bundle. "It's okay, we've got you." "Emma, don't." I lunged for her, but I was too late. As her hands touched the cloth, it fell away, revealing not a baby, but a thing of nightmares. Twisted limbs, skin like cracked leather, and eyes. So many eyes, all blinking up at us with malevolent glee. Emma's scream was cut short as shadow hands grasped her, pulling her into the writhing darkness. I grabbed for her, our fingers brushing for a moment before she was gone, swallowed by the impossible blackness. "Emma," I howled, clawing at the wall where she'd disappeared. Emma, the thing that wasn't a baby, laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. The shadows surged towards me, and I felt cold hands grasping at my clothes, my skin. In desperation, I threw myself at the door. This time, it flew open, spilling me out into the hallway. I scrambled to my feet, turning back to the hidden room, ready to dive back in after Emma. But there was nothing there, just a blank wall, as if the door had never existed. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that wall, my mind refusing to process what had happened. When I finally moved, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows. Shadows that seemed to twist and writhe just at the edge of my vision. I ran out of the house, down the street, not stopping until I reached the police station. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? When they searched the house, they found no hidden room, no sign of Emma, just a man, wild-eyed and raving about shadows and monsters. They think I killed her, that I'm insane. Some days, I wonder if they're right. But at night, when the shadows grow long, I know the truth. Emma is still in there, trapped in that impossible room with those things. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I swear I can hear her calling for me, calling me back to the room behind the wall. Story 6. The beam of my dying flashlight caught a glimpse of something pale and twisted disappearing around a corner of the cave. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized with growing horror that the inhuman scuttling sounds weren't echoes. We weren't alone down here in the darkness. And as the last flicker of light faded, leaving us in absolute blackness, I knew we might never see the sun again. It was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to explore one of the largest unexplored cave systems in the country. My girlfriend Mia and I had been planning this trip for months, poring over maps, gathering equipment, and training for the challenging terrain we'd face underground. We were experienced cavers, But this was going to be our biggest expedition yet. The first day went smoothly. We rappelled down the initial shaft, our excitement building as we entered chambers no human had ever seen before. The cave was beautiful, all glittering crystal formations and underground rivers carving their way through the ancient stone. "Can you believe this, Jake?" Mia's voice was filled with awe as she shone her headlamp around a vast cavern. "We're the first people to ever see this. It's like being on another planet." I grinned, squeezing her hand. "It's incredible. Just wait until we tell the others about what we found down here." We made camp in that chamber, setting up our tent and cooking a simple meal on our portable stove. As we sat there, surrounded by the quiet darkness, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was why we did this, to experience these moments of pure discovery and connection with the earth. If only I'd known then what was waiting for us deeper in the cave. The next morning, we packed up and continued our descent. The passages grew narrower, forcing us to crawl in some places. The air became thicker, heavier, carrying a musty scent I'd never encountered before in all my years of caving. "Do you smell that?" I asked Mia as we paused to consult our map. She nodded, wrinkling her nose. "Yeah, it's weird. Almost like, I don't know, rotting vegetation. But that doesn't make sense this far underground." I shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The cave felt different now, less like a natural formation and more like something alive. We pressed on, squeezing through a particularly tight passage. As I emerged on the other side, my headlamp illuminated something that made me freeze. "Mia," I called back, my voice tight. "You need to see this." She crawled out beside me, gasping as she saw what I was staring at. There, carved into the cave wall, were symbols. Dozens of them, crude but unmistakably deliberate. That's not possible," Mia whispered. "No one's ever been this deep in the cave system before. These symbols shouldn't be here." I reached out, tracing one of the carvings with my finger. It was worn smooth with age, as if it had been there for centuries. Maybe there's another entrance we don't know about, I suggested, not really believing it myself. Some ancient tribe could have used these caves for rituals or something. Mia shook her head slowly. "Jake, look at them closely. Don't they seem off to you?" I studied the symbols more carefully, and a chill ran down my spine. She was right. There was something fundamentally wrong about them. Angles that shouldn't exist, curves that seemed to twist in impossible ways. Looking at them for too long made my head hurt, like my brain was rebelling against what my eyes were seeing. "We should go back," Mia said, her voice shaking slightly. "Report this to the university. Let the experts handle it." Part of me wanted to agree with her, but we'd come so far, prepared for so long. Could we really turn back now? "Let's just go a little further," I said. "We'll document these symbols, take some samples, and then head back." "Okay?" Mia hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but not too much further. This place is starting to creep me out." We continued deeper into the cave, the symbols becoming more frequent and more complex. The passages twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense, defying the laws of geometry. More than once, I could have sworn we passed the same formation twice, even though we hadn't doubled back. And then we started hearing the sounds. At first, it was just on the edge of hearing. A faint scratching, like small stones falling. But it grew louder, more distinct. A rhythmic scuttling that echoed through the tunnels. "What is that?" Mia whispered, clutching my arm. "Cave crickets. I shook my head slowly. No cricket I've ever heard. It almost sounds like footsteps. Lots of them. As if in response, a chorus of chittering sounds erupted from the darkness ahead. High-pitched and frantic. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. And it was getting closer. "Run," I said, grabbing Mia's hand. Now, we turned and fled back the way we'd come, our headlamps bouncing wildly as we scrambled through the narrow passages. The chittering grew louder, accompanied now by a sound like hundreds of small, hard bodies scraping against stone. I chanced to look back and immediately wished I hadn't. In the jerky illumination of my headlamp, I caught glimpses of pale, twisted forms surging after us. Too many limbs, moving in ways that weren't natural. And eyes. So many eyes, gleaming in the darkness. "What are they?" Mia screamed as we ran. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind refused to process what I'd seen. We burst into a larger chamber, one we'd passed through earlier. I skidded to a stop, yanking Mia back as she nearly ran past me. "This way," I gasped, pulling her towards a narrow crevice I'd noticed earlier. "We can lose them in here." We squeezed into the tight space, scraping our backs raw against the rough stone. The chittering grew louder, echoing all around us. I could hear them entering the chamber, their alien bodies clicking against the rocks. And then my headlamp flickered and died. Mia's followed a second later, plunging us into absolute darkness. I felt her grip on my hand tighten, heard her ragged breathing next to me. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do we do?" I fumbled in my pack for my backup flashlight, trying to ignore the sounds of our pursuers growing closer. My fingers closed around the cool metal, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The beam that erupted from the flashlight was weak, already starting to fade. But it was enough to illuminate the crevice ahead of us, and the pale, twisted thing that was reaching into it. Mia's scream was cut short as the creature's elongated fingers wrapped around her ankle. I lunged for her, but it was too late. She was yanked out of the crevice with impossible strength, disappearing into the darkness beyond. "Mia!" I shouted, scrambling after her. But as I emerged from the crevice, my dying flashlight revealed a scene from a nightmare. The chamber was filled with the creatures, pale, eyeless things that moved with a terrible, alien grace. And in there, Medisti, being dragged towards a dark opening I hadn't noticed before, was Mia. Our eyes met for a brief moment. I saw the terror in hers, the desperate plea for help. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear and grief. The creatures seemed to ignore me, returning to whatever dark business had occupied them before our intrusion, as if Mia's capture had satisfied them. When I finally moved, it was on autopilot. I retreated back into the crevice, moving as silently as I could. My mind was blank, focused only on survival. I don't know how long I wandered through those twisting passages. Hours, days, time lost all meaning in the absolute darkness. My flashlight had long since died, leaving me to feel my way along the cold stone walls. Sometimes I thought I heard Mia calling for me. Other times, it was the chittering of those things, always just around the next corner, but I never saw them again. When I finally stumbled out of the cave entrance, the sunlight nearly blinded me. I fell to my knees, gasping in the fresh air, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. The search parties found me there, dehydrated and babbling about monsters in the dark. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? They searched the cave system for days, but found no trace of Mia or the horrors I described. They think she fell, that the trauma caused me to hallucinate. Some days, I almost believe them. It would be easier, in a way. But at night, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the chittering, still see those pale, twisted forms reaching out of the darkness. And I know the truth. Mia is still down there, somewhere in those impossible tunnels. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I think about going back for her. Because the worst part, the thing that truly haunts me, in those last moments before she vanished, I don't think Mia was being dragged away. I think she was following them willingly. Story 7. The door slammed shut behind us with a finality that made my stomach lurch. In the beam of my flickering flashlight, I saw the color drain from my friends' faces as they realized the same thing I had. We were trapped. The house we'd entered on a dare, the house that was supposed to be empty, had other plans for us. And as a child's laughter echoed from the darkness upstairs, I knew with sickening certainty that we weren't alone. It had started as a stupid dare, the kind of thing you do when you're young and feel invincible. The old Blackwood house had stood empty for decades, a looming Victorian monstrosity on the edge of town. Everyone knew the stories. The family that disappeared without a trace, the strange lights seen in the windows late at night, the screams that sometimes echoed across the overgrown grounds. "I bet you're too chicken to spend the night there," Tony had taunted, his eyes glinting with challenge in the light of our campfire. I'd scoffed, trying to hide the chill that ran down my spine at the thought. "Please, it's just an old house. There's nothing to be scared of." Sarah, always the voice of reason, had tried to talk us out of it. "Guys, come on. It's trespassing. We could get in real trouble." But peer pressure and teenage bravado won out. That's how the four of us, me, Tony, Sarah, and Mike, found ourselves standing on the crumbling porch of Blackwood House, just after midnight. The door had creaked open at Mike's touch, swinging inward to reveal a yawning darkness that seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. We'd exchanged nervous glances, but none of us wanted to be the first to back out. "Ladies first," Tony had said with a smirk, gesturing for Sarah to enter. She'd rolled her eyes but stepped forward, her flashlight beam sweeping across dusty floorboards and sheet-covered furniture. The rest of us had followed, our bravado fading with each step into the oppressive gloom of the house. That's when the door had slammed shut behind us, leaving us trapped in this nightmare. "Very funny, Tony," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "You can stop trying to scare us now." But Tony's face was pale, his eyes wide. That wasn't me. Mike tugged at the door handle, then threw his shoulder against the solid wood. It didn't budge. "Guys, it's locked. We're stuck in here." A cold weight settled in my stomach. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We were just going to hang out for a few hours, maybe explore a bit, then go home with a cool story to tell. Now, the child's laughter echoed through the house again, closer this time. We all froze, our flashlight beams darting wildly around the foyer. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Sarah whispered. "Who else is in here? Show yourself." Silence was her only answer. Then, a soft thump from upstairs, like something heavy falling to the floor. Tony's face hardened into a mask of determination. "Let's check it out. Maybe it's just some homeless guy trying to scare us off. We outnumber them." Part of me wanted to argue, to insist we find another way out. But a larger part was terrified of being left alone in this dark, oppressive house. So I nodded, falling into line as we crept towards the grand staircase. Our flashlights illuminated peeling wallpaper and faded portraits as we ascended. The faces in the painting seemed to follow us, their eyes holding secrets I didn't want to know. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched into darkness. Closed doors lined both sides, hiding God knows what behind them. "Which way?" Mike whispered. Before anyone could answer, one of the doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. A soft light spilled out, warm and inviting. "Hello," Sarah called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just that welcoming light beckoning us forward. We approached cautiously, our feet creaking on ancient floorboards. As we neared the open door, I could feel a change in the air. It was warmer, somehow fresher than the musty atmosphere of the rest of the house. Tony reached the door first, peering around the frame. He gasped, stumbling back. "No way," he breathed. "This is impossible." I stepped up beside him, looking into the room. My jaw dropped. Instead of the dusty, abandoned space I expected, the room beyond was alive. Warm lamplight filled the space, illuminating pristine furnishings that looked like they belonged in another century. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, and the air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. What the hell? Mike pushed past us, stepping into the room. How is this possible? We followed him in, drawn by the inexplicable warmth and light. It was like stepping into another world, one where the Blackwood family had never disappeared, where the house had never fallen into ruin. Sarah ran her hand over a polished side table, her fingers coming away clean. "No dust," she muttered. "This doesn't make any sense." The door swung shut behind us with a soft click. We all whirled around, but there was no one there. "Guys," Tony's voice was tight with fear. "The door's gone." He was right. Where the door had been was now just a solid wall, papered in the same floral print as the rest of the room. We were trapped. "No, no, no," Sarah muttered, running her hands over the wall where the door should have been. "This isn't real. It can't be real." A soft giggle made us all freeze. Slowly, we turned towards the source of the sound. There, sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, was a little girl. She looked to be about 7 or 8, dressed in an old-fashioned pinafore, her blonde curls neatly tied back with a ribbon. She smiled at us, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, they were old, far too old for her young face. "Hello," she said, her voice high and sweet. "I've been waiting ever so long for someone to play with. Won't you stay and play with me?" I felt Mike tense beside me, ready to bolt. But where could we run? The door was gone. We were trapped in this impossible room with this thing that looked like a little girl, but couldn't be. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The girl's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm Emily. I live here. This is my room, and now it's yours too. We're going to have so much fun together." As she spoke, the warm light began to fade. The fire dimmed, shadows creeping in from the corners of the room. And Emily began to change. Her skin grew pale, then grey, her cheeks hollowing out. Those 2 old eyes sank into her skull, glowing with an eerie light. Her hair fell out in clumps, leaving behind a patchy, rotted scalp. "Don't you want to play?" she asked, her voice now a rasping growl. "Don't you want to stay with me forever?" We screamed then, all pretense of bravery gone. We clawed at the walls, searching desperately for a way out. But there was nothing, just smooth, unyielding surfaces on all sides. Emily rose from her chair, her movements jerky and unnatural. She took a step towards us, then another. "You can't leave," she hissed. No one ever leaves. The shadows were alive now, writhing and twisting around us. I felt cold, spectral hands grasping at my clothes, my skin. The others were screaming, but their voices sounded distant, as if they were being pulled away. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to wake up from this nightmare. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone. The room was dark, dusty, abandoned. No fire, no furniture, no Emily, and no sign of my friends. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock and terror. Eventually, I became aware of a faint grey light filtering through boarded-up windows. Dawn had come. On shaking legs, I made my way out of the room. The door was there now, opening easily under my hand. I stumbled through the decaying house, half expecting Emily or some other horror to leap out at me. But there was nothing. Just dusts and shadows, and the weight of decades of emptiness. I burst out of the front door into the watery morning light, gulping in the fresh air. My car was still there, parked haphazardly in front of the house, but Tony's truck was gone. I called their names, searched the grounds, even worked up the courage to go back into the house. But there was no sign of Sarah, Tony, or Mike. They were just gone. The police didn't believe me, of course. How could they? 3 teenagers disappearing into thin air, leaving behind some wild story about a ghost girl in an impossible room. They thought I'd done something to my friends, hidden their bodies somewhere. Sometimes, I almost wish that were true. It would be easier than knowing the truth. Easier than remembering the look in Emily's eyes as she promised we'd stay with her forever. Easier than wondering if, somewhere in that house, in some twisted version of that warm, welcoming room, my friends are still there, still playing Emily's game for all eternity. And easier than wondering when she'll come for me. Because deep down, I know the truth. The game isn't over. And Emily always gets what she wants in the end. Story 8. The first howl split the night, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I froze in my tracks, my hand instinctively going to the pistol at my hip. That sound, it wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything I'd heard in my 15 years as a park ranger. As more howls joined the first, echoing across the hidden valley, I realized with growing horror that I'd stumbled upon something that defied explanation. And as the first pale, twisted forms emerged from the gathering shadows, I knew I might not live to tell anyone about it. It had started as a routine search and rescue operation. A group of hikers had gone missing in a remote area of the park, last seen heading towards a valley that didn't appear on any of our maps. As the senior ranger on duty, I'd volunteered to lead the search party. "Be careful out there, Sarah," my colleague Mike had said as I prepared to head out. "That area's got a bad reputation. Lots of strange stories from the locals." I'd laughed it off. After years in these mountains, I thought I'd seen it all. How wrong I was. The first day of searching had been uneventful. We'd found no trace of the missing hikers, but that wasn't unusual in terrain this rugged. As evening approached, I'd made the call to set up camp and continue the search in the morning. That's when things started to get weird. I was doing a final perimeter check when I saw it. A narrow gap between 2 rock faces. That, I could have sworn, wasn't there earlier. Curious, I'd squeezed through, finding myself in a small canyon I'd never seen before. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with some strange energy. The vegetation was unlike anything I'd seen in this part of the country. twisted forms that seemed to shy away from my touch. I should have turned back then, reported my finding to the rest of the team, but something compelled me forward. It was as if the valley itself was calling to me, drawing me deeper into its secrets. As I rounded a bend in the canyon, the land opened up before me. A vast, mist-shrouded valley stretched as far as I could see, dotted with ancient, gnarled trees and strange rock formations. And there, nestled in the center of the valley, was a village. My breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. We knew every inch of this park, a whole village hidden away. It didn't make sense. I keyed my radio, intending to call for backup. Nothing but static. I was on my own. Common sense told me to retreat, to get help. But the mystery of the missing hikers nagged at me. If they'd somehow found this place. Decision made, I began to make my way down into the valley. The mist swirled around my legs as I walked, obscuring the ground and making each step treacherous. The trees seemed to watch me as I passed, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. As I neared the village, I could make out more details. The buildings were old, their architecture unlike anything I'd seen before. No cars, no power lines. It was as if I'd stepped back in time. And yet, there was movement. Shapes flitting between the buildings, too quick for me to get a good look. I caught glimpses of pale skin, of eyes reflecting the fading light like animals. That's when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the valley into twilight. And that's when I heard the first howl. The sound froze me in place, every instinct screaming danger. More howls joined the first, a chorus that made my skin crawl. This wasn't the sound of wolves. This was something else. Movement caught my eye. There, emerging from between two buildings, was a figure. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its limbs too long, joints bending in impossible ways. As it stepped into a shaft of fading sunlight, I had to bite back a scream. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over an emaciated frame. But its face, God, its face. Elongated, more animal than human, with eyes that glowed with an unholy light. It saw me. Those glowing eyes locked onto mine, and its mouth opened in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I ran. Pure instinct took over as I turned and fled back the way I'd come. Behind me, I could hear the creature's howl, this time filled with the excitement of the hunt. And there were others joining it, the sound of many feet pounding the earth in pursuit. My lungs burned as I sprinted through the mist-covered valley. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. It was as if the very land was trying to stop me, to keep me here for its nightmarish inhabitants. I chanced to look back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creatures were gaining on me, dozens of them now. In the dim light, I could see them changing as they ran. Limbs elongating further, faces pushing out into muzzles, coarse hair sprouting from their pale skin. They were transforming before my eyes, becoming something that straddled the line between human and wolf. I turned back, pushing myself harder. The canyon entrance was just ahead. If I could reach it, squeeze through. A howl, much closer this time. I felt hot breath on the back of my neck. Claws raked across my back, tearing through my jacket and drawing blood. The pain spurred me on, giving me a final burst of speed. I hit the canyon entrance at full tilt, not slowing as I twisted sideways to slip through the narrow gap. Sharp rocks scraped my arms, tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I could hear the frustrated howls of my pursuers, too large now to follow. I burst out of the canyon, nearly colliding with Mike. He caught me as I stumbled, his eyes wide with shock. "Sarah, what the hell? Where have you been? We've been searching for hours." I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could I describe what I'd seen? Who would believe me? Mike's expression changed to one of concern as he took in my appearance. The torn clothes, the blood, the wild look in my eyes. "Sarah, what happened to you?" Before I could answer, a howl echoed from the canyon behind me. Mike's head snapped up, his hand going to his sidearm. What was that? I grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the canyon entrance. "We need to go. Now." He resisted for a moment, then nodded, keying his radio to call for an emergency evacuation. As we hurried back towards our base camp, I could feel eyes on us, watching from the shadows. The official report labeled it an animal attack. Mountain lion, probably. The search for the missing hikers was called off after a week. The area deemed too dangerous. I tried to tell them what I'd seen. The hidden valley, the village, the creatures that were neither human nor wolf. They listened politely, then suggested I take some time off. "Stress and trauma can do funny things to the mind," they said. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I can hear them, howling in the distance, calling to each other, calling to me. I've requested a transfer to another park, somewhere far from here, far from those mountains and the secrets they hide. But deep down, I know it won't matter, because now I know the truth, that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of civilization. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I see a glint of that unholy light in my own eyes. The scratch on my back, the one the doctors said would heal without a scar, it's still there. And on nights when the moon is brightest, it burns. I find myself drawn to the woods now, in a way I never was before. There's a part of me that wants to run beneath those trees, to feel the earth beneath my feet and the wind in my hair. A part that yearns to answer those distant howls with one of my own. I'm afraid to sleep these days, afraid of the dreams that come, vivid and wild. Dreams of running through mist-covered valleys, of hunts beneath a swollen moon. Dreams where I'm no longer the pursued, but the pursuer. I think about those missing hikers sometimes. Wonder if they're still out there, in that impossible village. If they've become like the creatures I saw. Or if they met a fate worse than death. And I wonder, with growing dread, if one day I'll find myself drawn back to that hidden canyon. Back to the Valley of Shadows, where the line between human and beast blurs with the setting of the sun. Because now I know the truth. The most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that chased you through the dark. They're the ones that get inside you, that change you bit by bit until you look in the mirror one day and realize you've become the very thing you once feared. Story 9. The first time I saw my reflection blink, I thought I was losing my mind. But as I stared into the antique mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, I watched in horror as my reflection smiled, a twisted, malevolent grin that I knew wasn't mine. That's when I realized the stories about my family's curse weren't just legends. And as the whispers started, echoing through the halls of my inherited home, I knew I was in a fight not just for my sanity, but for my very soul. I never wanted to come back to Raven's Hollow. The small, isolated town had haunted my nightmares ever since I was a child. Forced to spend summers in my grandfather's imposing Victorian mansion, But when the lawyer's letter arrived, informing me of my grandfather's death and my unexpected inheritance, I found myself drawn back to the place I'd sworn I'd never return to. The drive into town was like stepping back in time. Nothing had changed. The same quaint storefronts, the same suspicious glances from locals who clearly remembered the Blackwood family and all the rumors that surrounded us. I could almost hear my mother's voice, warning me never to talk about our family history, to ignore the whispers and pointed fingers. As I pulled up to the iron gates of Blackwood Manor, a chill ran down my spine. The house loomed before me, all Gothic spires and darkened windows, looking more like a mausoleum than a home. For a moment, I considered turning around, driving away and never looking back. But curiosity, and if I'm honest, the promise of inheritance, propelled me forward. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the front door. It creaked open, revealing a dusty foyer that smelled of mothballs and decay. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. "Hello?" I called out, not really expecting an answer. "Anyone here?" Silence was my only reply. Of course, the lawyer had mentioned that the staff had been dismissed years ago, my grandfather preferring to live his final years in solitude. I made my way through the house, memories flooding back with each room I entered. The parlor, where my grandmother would serve tea, her hands shaking as she poured. The library where my grandfather would sit for hours, poring over ancient books and languages I didn't recognize. And always, the feeling of being watched, of secrets hiding in every shadow. As night fell, I found myself in my grandfather's study. It was here, I knew, that I would find answers. The lawyer had been vague about the terms of the inheritance, mentioning only that there were conditions that would be revealed in a letter my grandfather had left for me. The letter sat on the massive oak desk, sealed with a wax stamp bearing the Blackwood family crest. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and began to read. "My dear grandson, if you are reading this, then I have passed from this world, and the burden of our family's legacy now falls to you. I know you have questions about our history, about the whispers that have followed our family for generations. It is time you knew the truth. The Blackwood curse is real. It began centuries ago, with an ancestor who delved too deep into forces beyond mortal understanding. In his arrogance, he made a bargain with entities that should not be named. In exchange for power and knowledge, he offered up his bloodline. Our bloodline. Every generation, the curse grows stronger. It whispers to us, tempts us, tries to corrupt us. Some have resisted, others have not been so fortunate. You are the last of our line, and the burden falls to you. In this house, you will find the tools to fight the curse, to perhaps even break it. But be warned, the entities our ancestor bargained with will not give up easily. They will try to claim you, as they have tried to claim us all. Be strong, be vigilant, and above all, do not trust what you see in the mirrors. May God have mercy on your soul. Your grandfather, Ezra Blackwood. I sat back, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. Curses, entities, bargains with dark forces. It was the stuff of fairy tales and horror movies, not reality. And yet, hadn't I always felt that there was something off about our family? Hadn't I seen things, as a child, that I'd convinced myself were just imagination? A sudden gust of wind blew through the study, extinguishing the candles I'd lit earlier. In the darkness, I could have sworn I heard whispers, unintelligible words in a language that made my skin crawl. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam caught the edge of an ornate mirror hanging on the wall, and that's when I saw it. My reflection blinking independently of me. I stared, frozen in shock, as my reflection's lips curled into a smile I knew wasn't mine. Its eyes. My eyes began to darken, the pupils expanding until they were nothing but black voids. "No," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real. It can't be real." The reflection's smile widened, revealing teeth that were suddenly too sharp, too numerous. Its mouth opened, and a voice that was mine but not mine whispered, "Oh, but it is. And we've been waiting for you for so long." I ran. Out of the study, down the hall, my heart pounding in my ears. But everywhere I turned, there were mirrors. On walls, on side tables, even reflected in window panes. And in each one, my reflection moved independently, reaching out as if trying to grab me, pull me in. I finally made it to my old bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what was happening. "It's not real," I muttered to myself. "You're tired, stressed. This is all just in your head." "Is it?" a voice whispered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Or are you finally seeing the truth?" I spun around, searching for the source of the voice. The room was empty, but the shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive somehow. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "What do you want?" A chuckle, dark and menacing, echoed through the room. "We are the ones your ancestor made his bargain with. We are the power behind your family's success. The whispers in the dark that have guided generations of Blackwoods. And now, we've come to collect what is owed." The shadows began to move, coalescing into a shape that was almost human, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite define. It loomed over me, its form shifting and writhing. "Your grandfather resisted us," the entity hissed. "He found ways to keep us at bay. But you're untrained, unprepared. You'll be ours, just as your ancestor promised." I backed away, my mind racing. The letter had mentioned tools to fight the curse. What had my grandfather used? What could possibly stand against something like this? My back hit the wall, and I felt something cool and metallic press against my hand. I glanced down to see an old iron key hanging on a hook. A key I remembered from my childhood, one my grandfather had always worn around his neck. Without thinking, I grabbed the key and held it out in front of me like a weapon. The effect was immediate. The shadow creature recoiled, hissing in pain or anger. "You think that will save you?" it snarled. "You don't even know how to use it. You're alone, ignorant, helpless." But its reaction had given me a spark of hope. I wasn't powerless. There were ways to fight this. "I may not know everything," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "But I'm a Blackwood. And if my family has been fighting you for generations, then that knowledge, that strength, is in my blood. I just have to find it." The creature laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty to it now. "Brave words. But how long can you resist us? We are eternal, patient. We'll wear you down, bit by bit, until you beg us to take you." I gripped the key tighter, feeling its weight, its history. "Maybe," I admitted, "but not today. And not without a fight." With a final snarl of frustration, the shadow dissipated, retreating to the corners of the room. I was alone again, but I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I sank to the floor, exhausted but determined. My grandfather's letter had said there were tools to fight the curse, maybe even break it. I had to find them, had to understand what I was up against. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I made a decision. I wouldn't run from Raven's Hollow, from my inheritance. I would stay, would delve into the secrets my family had kept hidden for generations, because now I knew the truth. The Blackwood curse was real, a looming threat not just to me, but potentially to the whole world if these entities ever broke free. And I was the only one who could stop it. As I got to my feet, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bedroom mirror. For a moment, I saw double myself as I was, and overlaid on that a version of me that was stronger, more confident, with eyes that held knowledge and power I couldn't yet comprehend. I met my reflection's gaze, and this time, we blinked together. The battle for my soul, for my family's redemption, had only just begun. But for the first time since I'd set foot in Blackwood Manor, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was a Blackwood, and I would not go down without a fight. Story 10. The streetlights flickered and died as I turned onto Willow Lane, plunging the unfamiliar neighborhood into darkness. My GPS sputtered and went silent, the screen fading to black. As I peered through the windshield at the rows of identical, abandoned houses, a chill ran down my spine. Something was very wrong here, and as I saw movement in the shadows between the buildings, I realized with growing horror that I wasn't alone in this ghost town. Whatever was out there, it had been waiting for someone like me to wander in. I hadn't meant to end up here. It was supposed to be a quick trip across town to pick up a package from a friend. But one wrong turn led to another, and before I knew it, I was hopelessly lost in a part of the city I'd never seen before. As the sun began to set, I decided to use my phone's GPS to find my way back to familiar territory. That's when things started to get weird. The app kept trying to route me down streets that didn't exist, through neighborhoods I'd never heard of. Street signs became scarce, then non-existent. The buildings around me grew older, more dilapidated. I tried calling my friend, but there was no signal. No matter which direction I drove, I couldn't seem to find my way out of this maze-like area. And then I turned onto Willow Lane. The moment my car crossed some invisible threshold, everything electronic died. My headlights, the streetlights, my phone, all went dark in an instant. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. For a long moment, I sat there in the darkness, trying to calm my racing thoughts. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe a power outage. But that wouldn't explain my car. A movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. There, between two houses, I saw a figure. Just for a second, illuminated by the last fading rays of twilight. Tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. I blinked, and it was gone. Get a grip, I muttered to myself, shaking my head. You're tired, you're stressed. Your mind is playing tricks on you. But as I peered out into the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The houses loomed around me, their empty windows like sightless eyes staring down at my stranded car. I needed to get out of here, find help, or at least a working phone. Taking a deep breath, I opened the car door and stepped out into the silent street. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying a musty scent like old books and decay. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the cracked pavement as I made my way to the nearest house. The porch steps creaked under my weight as I approached the front door. My knuckles had barely grazed the weathered wood when the door swung open with a long, drawn-out groan. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. Is anyone home? I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help. No answer. The house beyond the threshold was dark, filled with shapes I couldn't quite make out. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to run to my car and keep driving until I found my way out of this nightmare. But where would I go? I was lost, my GPS dead, in a neighborhood that shouldn't exist. Swallowing my fear, I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, sending up small puffs of dust with each step. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I began to make out details of the room. Furniture draped in sheets like pale ghosts in the darkness. Wallpaper peeling from the walls in long, curling strips. And everywhere, a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for what must have been years. Hello, I tried again, moving deeper into the house. Please, if anyone's here, I just need to use a phone. A soft thump from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps moving across the ceiling above me. So there was someone here after all. Hello, I called out, louder this time. I heard you up there. Please, I just need help. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, they began to move again. Towards the stairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the doorway to the foyer. Any second now, whoever was up there would appear. Maybe they could explain what was going on. Help me find my way out of this strange, abandoned neighborhood. A shadow fell across the doorway. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words died in my throat as the figure emerged from the darkness. It wasn't human, not even close. Tall and emaciated, its skin was a sickly grey color that seemed to absorb what little light there was. Its limbs were too long, too thin, bending at impossible angles. But its face, God, its face. Where eyes should have been were just empty, weeping sockets. Its mouth was a gash across its lower face, filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore from my throat as I stumbled backward, knocking over a small table in my haste to get away. The creature's head snapped towards the sound, those empty sockets somehow focusing on me. Its mouth opened in a silent snarl, and it began to move with terrifying speed. I ran out of the living room, down the hall, searching desperately for the back door. Behind me, I could hear the thing in pursuit, its movements accompanied by a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves in the wind. I burst out of the back door into an overgrown yard. Without pausing, I vaulted over the fence into the neighboring property. I had to get back to my car, had to get out of this place. As I ran, I became aware of movement all around me. More of those creatures, emerging from houses, from shadows, all converging on me. Their silent pursuit was somehow more terrifying than if they had been howling or shrieking. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to unlock the door. Please start, I silently begged as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights blazing in the darkness. The creatures recoiled from the sudden light, giving me a moment's respite. I threw the car into drive and slammed on the gas. I drove blindly, taking turn after turn, praying to find a way out of this labyrinth. In my rearview mirror, I could see the creatures following, moving with that same impossible speed. And then, just as suddenly as I had entered it, I was out. The dilapidated houses gave way to normal buildings, streetlights flickered back to life, and my GPS sputtered back into action. I didn't slow down until I was back in familiar territory, my heart still pounding in my chest. Had it really happened? Or had I somehow fallen asleep at the wheel, dreamed the whole terrifying encounter? But as I pulled into my driveway, I caught a glimpse of something in my side mirror. A flash of grey skin, of empty eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I sat in my car for a long time, unable to make myself get out. Because now I knew the truth. There were things out there in the dark, things that waited in forgotten places for unwary travelers to stumble upon them. And somehow I knew this wasn't over. They had seen me, had almost had me, and they wouldn't give up so easily. Even now, weeks later, I sometimes catch glimpses of them. A figure standing unnaturally still on a street corner. A flash of movement just at the edge of my vision. And always, the feeling of being watched. I don't drive at night anymore. I've mapped out every route I take, memorized every turn. I won't risk another wrong turn, another journey into that nightmare realm that exists just on the edges of our world. But sometimes, in the dark of night, I swear I can hear them. A dry rustling outside my window, the creak of floorboards when I know I'm alone in the house. And I wonder, with growing dread, if it's only a matter of time before they find me again, because now I know the truth. There are places in this world that don't appear on any map, populated by things that should not exist. And once you've seen them, once they've seen you, you can never truly escape. So if you're driving late one night, and you find yourself in a neighborhood you don't recognize, where the houses all look the same and the streets seem to loop back on themselves, don't stop, don't get out of your car. Just keep driving and pray you find your way out before they find you. Because in those forgotten places, in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, they're always waiting, always watching, always hungry for the next unfortunate soul to take a wrong turn into their domain. Story 11. The inhuman shriek echoed through the abandoned corridors, freezing the blood in my veins. I turned to my fellow urban explorers, their faces pale in the beam of my flashlight. What the hell was that? Mike whispered, his voice trembling. Before I could answer, the sound came again, closer this time. And as the shadows around us began to move, I realized with growing horror that we'd stumbled into something far worse than an abandoned research facility. Whatever they'd been studying down here, it was still alive, and it was hungry. It wasn't supposed to go like this. We were just looking for a thrill, a chance to explore somewhere off limits, and maybe get some cool photos for our urban exploration blog. The old Glendale research facility had been abandoned for years, its purpose shrouded in mystery. Perfect fodder for our audience of conspiracy theorists and thrill seekers. There were 4 of us, me, Mike, Sarah, and Alex. We'd been doing this for years, sneaking into abandoned buildings and forgotten places. We thought we'd seen it all. How wrong we were. Getting into the facility was almost too easy. A few snips of the rusty chain on the gate, a broken window, and we were in. The entrance level was what we expected. Dusty offices, empty labs, nothing too exciting. But then we found the elevator. Think it still works? Sarah asked, running her hand over the tarnished metal doors. I shrugged. Only one way to find out. We pried the doors open, revealing the elevator car still on our level. The buttons inside were unlike any I'd seen before. They went down much further than should have been possible for a building this size. Holy shit, Alex breathed, shining his flashlight on the panel. Look at this. Sublevels going down to 20. What the hell were they doing here? A shiver ran down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was exactly the kind of mystery our followers loved. Let's find out, I said, pressing the button for sublevel 1. To our surprise, the elevator lurched into motion. As we descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. By the time we reached sub-level 1, we could see our breath fogging in the air. The doors opened with a groan, revealing a long, dark corridor. The walls were bare concrete, lined with heavy metal doors. It looked more like a prison than a research facility. "I don't like this," Mike muttered, shining his flashlight down the hallway. "Maybe we should go back." But curiosity got the better of us. We stepped out of the elevator, the doors closing behind us with an ominous thud. As we moved down the corridor, I noticed strange markings on the doors. Not numbers, but symbols I didn't recognize. They seemed to writhe and shift in the beam of my flashlight, making my head hurt if I looked at them too long. "Guys, check this out," Sarah called from further down the hall. She was standing in front of an open door, peering into the room beyond. We gathered around her, shining our lights inside. It was a lab of some kind, but unlike any I'd ever seen. Strange machines lined the walls, their purposes unknowable. In the center of the room was a large, circular pit, covered by a heavy metal grate. "What is this place?" Alex whispered, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. Before anyone could answer, a sound came from the pit. A soft scraping, like something moving against metal. We all froze, our lights fixed on the grate. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, suddenly, something slammed against the grate from below, making us all jump back. "Fuck this," Mike said, his voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." Now, but as we turned to leave, we realized with growing horror that the corridor behind us had changed. Where there had been a straight path back to the elevator, there was now a twisting labyrinth of passages. "This isn't possible," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "How?" Another slam from the pit, louder this time. The grate was beginning to bend. "Run!" I shouted, not caring which direction we went, as long as it was away from that room. We fled down the twisting corridors, our footsteps echoing off the bare walls. Behind us, I heard the sound of metal tearing, followed by that bone-chilling shriek. We ran blindly, taking turn after turn, going deeper into the facility. The symbols on the doors became more complex, more alien. The air grew colder, heavy with a musty scent that made my stomach churn. Finally, gasping for breath, we found ourselves in a large circular room. Unlike the stark corridors, this space was filled with equipment, banks of computers, strange machines, and in the center, a raised platform surrounded by a ring of what looked like Tesla coils. "What is all this?" Alex asked, moving towards one of the computer banks. "Don't touch anything," I warned, but it was too late. As his hand brushed against a keyboard, lights flickered to life around the room. The machines hummed with awakening power. On screens around us, strange symbols began to scroll, the same kind we'd seen on the doors. They moved faster and faster, making my head spin just looking at them. "Guys," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Look." She was pointing at the platform in the center of the room. The air above it was rippling, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a thrown stone. As we watched, the ripples grew larger, the air seeming to tear open. And through that tear, we saw something. A glimpse of a world that shouldn't exist. Of twisted landscapes and impossible geometries. Of things moving in the shadows. Things that defy description. The shriek came again, much closer now. Whatever had been in that pit was coming for us. "We have to shut it down," I said, moving towards the computers. There has to be a way to turn it off. But as I reach for the keyboard, a tendril of something shot out from the tear in reality. It wrapped around my wrist, burning cold. I screamed, trying to pull away, but its grip was like iron. More tendrils emerged, reaching for my friends. I heard their shouts of terror, saw them struggling against the impossible strength of these things from beyond. And then I saw it. The creature from the pit, standing in the doorway. In the harsh light of the lab, I could finally see it clearly. I wish I hadn't. It was tall, far taller than any human, its body a twisted mass of limbs and tentacles. Its skin was a sickly, pulsating mass of colors that hurt to look at. But its face, God, its face. A writhing mass of eyes and mouths, constantly shifting and reforming. As it moved towards us, more of its kind emerged from the shadows behind it. The air was filled with their unearthly shrieks, a cacophony that threatened to drive me mad. In desperation, I grabbed a piece of broken equipment and smashed it into the computer bank. Sparks flew, and the machines around us began to sputter and die. The tear in reality began to close, the tendrils retreating back through it. But the creatures were still coming, reaching for us with their impossible limbs. The elevator, Mike shouted, pointing to a door I hadn't noticed before. Run, we fled, the creatures in hot pursuit, through twisting corridors that seemed to shift and change as we ran, always just a step ahead of those grasping tentacles. Finally, mercifully, we reached the elevator. We piled in, slamming the button for the ground floor. As the doors began to close, I caught one last glimpse of our pursuers. The lead creature reached the elevator, its tentacles slipping through the narrowing gap. I lashed out with the piece of equipment I still held, severing the writhing limb. The creature's shriek of pain was cut off as the doors finally closed. We rode up in silence, all of us too shocked, too terrified to speak. When the doors opened on the ground floor, we ran. Out of the building, into the blessed normality of the world above. We didn't stop running until we reached our car, peeling out of the parking lot like the hounds of hell were after us. In a way, I suppose they were. It's been weeks since that night, but I still can't shake the horror of what we saw. The others won't talk about it. We took down our blog, destroyed all our photos and notes from that night. But sometimes, in my dreams, I see that tear in reality. I see the worlds beyond, the creatures waiting to break through. And I wonder, with growing dread, if we truly escaped, or if we just delayed the inevitable. Because now I know the truth. There are things out there, things beyond our comprehension. Things that were never meant to be seen by human eyes. And once you've seen them, once they've seen you, can you ever truly be free? So if you're an urban explorer, if you like to poke around in abandoned places, take my advice. Leave the Glendale Research Facility alone. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some depths should never be plumbed. Because in the darkness below, in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, they're waiting. Always waiting. And they're hungry for more than just knowledge. Story 12. The moment I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. They weren't the eyes of the affable drifter who'd thumbed a ride 20 miles back. These eyes were cold, predatory, filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. As his fingers closed around the back of my seat, I realized with sickening clarity that I was trapped in my own rolling cage with something that was no longer human. And we still had 200 miles of empty highway ahead of us. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight. the monotony of the highway broken only by the rhythmic thump of my rig's tires on the asphalt. It was the kind of mind-numbing boredom that can make even the most experienced trucker start to see things. So when I spotted the lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, I almost thought I was hallucinating. Company policy strictly forbade picking up hitchhikers, but out here, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but desert stretching to the horizon, it seemed cruel to leave someone stranded. Besides, I reasoned, I could use someone to talk to help keep me awake for the long haul ahead. I eased my 18-wheeler onto the shoulder, brakes hissing as I came to a stop. The hitchhiker jogged up to the passenger side, and I leaned over to open the door. "Thanks, man," he said, hauling himself up into the cab. Thought I was going to be out here forever. He looked ordinary enough, mid-30s, scruffy beard, worn jeans, and a flannel shirt. A battered backpack completed the drifter look. "Where are you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the highway. "West?" he replied with a shrug. "Anywhere's better than where I've been." I nodded, not prying further. We all have our stories, our reasons for being on the road. For the next hour or so, we made small talk. He called himself Jack, said he was from back east, looking for work out in California. Nothing too personal, nothing too deep. Just the kind of casual conversation you'd expect between strangers thrown together by circumstance. As night fell, I flicked on my high beams, illuminating the empty road ahead. Jack had fallen silent, and I glanced over to see if he'd dozed off. He was staring straight ahead, his body unnaturally still. Something about his posture sent a chill down my spine. "You okay there, Jack?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He turned to me slowly, too slowly, his movements jerky like a marionette with tangled strings. When he spoke, his voice had changed, becoming deeper, rougher. "I'm just fine," he said, his lips peeling back in what might have been a smile but looked more like a snarl. "But I don't think you will be." My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I fought to keep my eyes on the road. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me after too many hours behind the wheel. But then I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, and I knew this was all too real. They were different now, no longer the warm brown they'd been earlier. These eyes were yellow, with vertical pupils like a cat's or a snake's. They seemed to glow in the dim light of the cab, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. If you want me to let you off somewhere, just say the word." Jack, or whatever he was, now chuckled. I sound like gravel in a blender. "Oh, it's far too late for that. We're going to have some fun, you and I. It's been so long since I've had a playmate for the long haul." His hand shot out, faster than I could react, grabbing my arm. His touch was ice cold, his fingers digging into my flesh with inhuman strength. I yelped in pain, the truck swerving dangerously as I fought to keep control. "Careful now," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Wouldn't want to have an accident, would we?" "Not when we're just getting started." I tried to jerk my arm away, but his grip was like iron. With my free hand, I fumbled for the CB radio, desperate to call for help. Before I could reach it, Jack's other hand lashed out, ripping the radio from its mount and tossing it out the open window. I watched helplessly as my last lifeline disappeared into the darkness behind us. Now, he tutted, his voice a mocking parody of concern. "No need for outside interference. This is between you and me." My mind raced. searching for a way out of this nightmare. I could try to stop the truck, but out here in the middle of nowhere, that would just leave me even more vulnerable. I could try to crash, but at these speeds, that would likely kill us both. Not that I was sure this thing could be killed by normal means. As if reading my thoughts, Jack leaned in closer, his breath hot on my ear. Don't bother trying to escape. There's nowhere to go out here, no one to hear you scream. It's just you and me and the long, dark road ahead. His free hand began to change, the fingers elongating into wicked-looking claws. He dragged them lightly across my cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. I'm going to enjoy this, he purred. It's been so long since I've had a meal that could fight back. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. This thing was going to kill me, out here in the middle of nowhere. I'd be just another mysterious disappearance, another trucking tragedy blamed on fatigue or carelessness. No, I couldn't let that happen. I had a family waiting for me, people who depended on me. I couldn't die out here, not like this. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I stomped on the brakes. The truck's tires screamed in protest as we skidded across the asphalt. Jack was thrown forward, his grip on my arm loosening for just a moment. It was all the opening I needed. I twisted free, my other hand already reaching for the door handle. As the truck ground to a halt, I threw myself out of the cab, hitting the ground hard and rolling. Pain exploded through my body, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run into the desert if I had to. But Jack was already there, standing between me and escape. In the harsh glare of the truck's headlights, I could see that he'd changed even more. His body was longer, more sinuous, his skin taking on a scaly sheen. His mouth had stretched into a reptilian maw, filled with razor-sharp teeth. That wasn't very nice, he hissed, advancing on me with predatory grace. I was going to make it quick. Now, I think I'll take my time. I backed away, my eyes darting around for anything I could use as a weapon. My gaze fell on the fuel tank of my truck, and a desperate plan formed in my mind. "You want me?" I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Come and get me, you son of a bitch." I turned and ran, not towards the open desert, but back towards the cab of my truck. I could hear Jack behind me, moving with inhuman speed. Just as I reached the fuel tank, I felt his claws graze my back, tearing through my shirt and into flesh. I cried out in pain, but didn't stop. My hand closed around the fuel cap, twisting it off. In one fluid motion, I spun around, splashing diesel fuel into Jack's face. He screamed, a sound that was more animal than human, stumbling back and clawing at his eyes. I didn't waste the opportunity. I ran to the cab, hauling myself up and slamming the door shut. My trembling hands found the keys, and the engine roared to life. In the side mirror, I could see Jack recovering, his yellow eyes fixing on me with murderous rage. He launched himself at the truck, but I was already moving, the massive vehicle picking up speed. I drove for hours, my heart pounding, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of pursuit. It wasn't until the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky that I finally allowed myself to relax, just a little. I found a truck stop soon after, practically falling out of the cab in my haste to be around other people, to be in the light. The other truckers stared at me, wild-eyed, covered in blood and diesel fuel. But I didn't care. I called the police, tried to explain what had happened. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? But they did take my statement, promised to look into reports of a dangerous drifter in the area. It's been months since that night, but I still can't shake the memory of those yellow eyes, that inhuman hunger. I don't drive long haul anymore. Can't bring myself to face those empty stretches of highway, because now I know the truth. There are things out there in the dark, things that wear human faces and prey on the unwary. And sometimes they thumb a ride on the lonely roads that cut through the wilderness of this vast country. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a solitary figure on the side of the road, keep driving. No matter how harmless they look, no matter how much you might want the company, keep driving. Because you never know what might be hiding behind those human eyes. And some rides are one-way trips to a destination you don't want to reach. Story 13. The cellar doors slammed shut with a finality that made my blood run cold. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in the damp darkness, mixing with the muffled howl of the storm raging outside. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw my wife and kids huddled together, their faces pale with fear. We'd sought shelter from the storm in this old farmhouse, but as I heard heavy footsteps moving above us, I realized with growing horror that we'd walked right into a trap, and our captors were anything but human. It was supposed to be a fun, family road trip, a chance to bond and create memories before our oldest, Emily, left for college in the fall. We'd been driving for hours, the kids bickering in the back seat, my wife Sarah navigating as I focused on the winding country roads. That's when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, the sky darkening to an unnatural purple-black in a matter of minutes. Rain lashed against the windshield, and thunder boomed overhead with such force that I could feel it in my chest. "Dad, I'm scared," Tommy, our youngest, whimpered from the back seat. I tried to keep my voice calm, reassuring. "It's okay, buddy. It's just a storm. We'll find somewhere to wait it out." But as I peered through the rain-soaked windshield, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, I wasn't so sure. The road ahead was barely visible, and twice I'd nearly driven off into the ditch. That's when Sarah spotted it. "Look!" she cried, pointing off to our right. "There's a house over there." Through the curtain of rain, I could just make out the silhouette of an old farmhouse, a dim light glowing in one of the windows. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than risking the increasingly treacherous road. I pulled into the long, muddy driveway, the car's tires spinning as we approached the house. Up close, it looked even older, its paint peeling and shutters hanging askew. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and right now, any shelter looked like heaven. "Okay, everyone ready?" I asked, turning to face my family. "We're going to make a run for it. Stay close." On the count of 3, we burst out of the car, the wind and rain immediately drenching us as we sprinted towards the porch. I pounded on the front door, praying someone was home. "Hello!" I shouted over the howling wind. "Is anyone there?" "We need help." No answer. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily. We tumbled inside, grateful to be out of the storm. The interior of the house was dark, lit only by a single oil lamp on a side table. The furniture was old, covered in sheets, and a thick layer of dust coated every surface. It looked like no one had lived here for years. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice echoing in the empty house. "We're sorry to barge in like this. The storm." Her voice trailed off as we all registered the same thing. Despite the light we'd seen from outside, there was no sign that anyone had been here recently. "Mum, I don't like this place," Emily said, hugging herself. "It feels wrong." I was about to suggest we try to wait out the storm in the car when a loud crash from upstairs made us all jump. "What was that?" Tommy whispered, clinging to Sarah's leg. Before I could answer, we heard it. Footsteps, heavy and slow, moving across the floor above us. "I thought you said no one was here," Emily hissed, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't think there was," I stammered, my mind racing. Who could be up there? And why hadn't they answered when we called out? The footsteps stopped, directly overhead. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing and the storm outside. Then, slowly, the footsteps began to move again, towards the stairs. "We need to go," Sarah whispered urgently. "Now." We turned towards the door, but before we could reach it, a new sound froze us in place. A low, guttural growl, coming from the darkness of the hallway to our left. Something moved in the shadows, something large. As it stepped into the dim light cast by the oil lamp, I felt my heart stop. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to a person ended. Its skin was a sickly grey, stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Long, gangly arms ended in hands tipped with wickedly sharp claws. But its face, God, its face. Where eyes should have been were just empty, weeping sockets. Its mouth was a gash across its lower face, filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. For a moment, we all stood there, frozen in horror. Then Emily screamed, and all hell broke loose. The creature lunged forward with inhuman speed. I shoved my family towards the door, yelling at them to run. But as Sarah yanked the door open, we were met with a wall of wind and rain, and more of those things, emerging from the storm like nightmares made flesh. "The cellar," I shouted, spotting a door off to the side. "Go!" We raced down the stairs, the sounds of pursuit close behind. The cellar was dark and damp, filled with old furniture and musty boxes. At the far end, I spotted another door, maybe a way out. But before we could reach it, the cellar door slammed shut above us. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in the darkness, sealing us in. For a long moment, we huddled there in the gloom, our ragged breathing the only sound. Then, slowly, our eyes began to adjust to the dim light filtering through a tiny, grim-covered window. "Dad," Tommy's voice quavered. "What? What were those things?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "I don't know, buddy, but we're going to be okay. We'll find a way out of here." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. We were trapped in a cellar, in a house full of monsters, with a storm raging outside. Our chances didn't look good. Above us, we could hear movement. Heavy footsteps, the scrape of claws on wood. They knew we were down here. They were waiting. Sarah pulled me aside, her face pale in the dim light. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "Those things, they're not human. They're going to kill us." I squeezed her hand, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We'll figure something out. There's got to be another way out of here." We began to search the cellar, looking for anything that could help us. Old tools, a broken ladder, crates filled with dusty mason jars. Nothing that could serve as a weapon against those creatures. As I moved a stack of boxes, I uncovered something that made my breath catch. An old ham radio set. It looked ancient, but if we could get it working... "Emily," I called softly. "Come take a look at this. You did that electronics project last year, right?" My daughter nodded, her eyes lighting up with a glimmer of hope as she saw the radio. Together, we began to work on it, using the dim light from our phones to see what we were doing. The sounds from above grew louder, more frenzied. They were getting impatient. "Hurry," Sarah urged, keeping Tommy close as she watched the cellar door. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we managed to get the radio working. Static filled the air as Emily carefully turned the dial, searching for a signal. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Anyone out there? This is emergency services. We've received reports of strange creatures in the area. If you can hear this, stay indoors and wait for help." I repeat, hope surged through me. Someone knew about these things. Help was coming. We just had to hold out a little longer. But our relief was short-lived. With a splintering crash, the cellar door burst open. Pale, twisted forms began to pour down the stairs, their eyeless faces turned towards us, mouths opening in silent screams. "The other door," I yelled, grabbing Tommy and pushing the others ahead of me. "Go!" We raced across the cellar, the creatures right behind us. Sarah reached the door first, yanking it open. Beyond was a tunnel, old and earthen, stretching off into darkness. We didn't hesitate, plunging into the unknown. We ran blindly, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind us. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us deeper underground. Just when I thought we couldn't go on any further, we saw a light ahead. We burst out into the open air, gasping. We were in a field, the storm still raging overhead. But in the distance, I could see flashing lights. Police cars, ambulances, help. As we staggered towards salvation, I chanced a look back. The creatures stood at the mouth of the tunnel, shrinking back from the storm and the approaching lights. Their eyeless faces seemed to stare right at me, and I knew this wasn't over. They'd be waiting in that old farmhouse and others like it, waiting for the next unsuspecting family seeking shelter from a storm. But for now, we were safe. And as the paramedics wrapped blankets around us, and the police asked their questions, I held my family close, grateful for our escape, but knowing that the world had changed forever. Because now we knew the truth. There are things out there in the dark, things that hunger for human flesh and soul. And sometimes, the most dangerous storm isn't the one raging in the sky, but the one waiting behind a seemingly welcoming door. Story 14. The moment I overheard them discussing the harvest, I knew I was in way over my head. My hand froze midway through wiping down the counter, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. These weren't just any late-night customers. There was something else entirely. And as their cold eyes turned towards me, I realized with growing horror that I'd just stumbled upon a conspiracy that went far beyond this small-town diner. A conspiracy that I might not live to expose. I never wanted to work the graveyard shift at Lou's Diner. But when you're a single mum with bills to pay and a daughter to feed, you take what you can get. The pay was decent, and the tips weren't bad. Especially from the long-haul truckers passing through our little town in the dead of night. At first, it was just like any other job. Sling coffee, mop floors, deal with the occasional drunk looking for a place to sober up before heading home. But then they started coming in. It was always the same. Every night, like clockwork, at exactly 3 a.m., they'd arrive. 4 of them, 3 men and a woman, dressed in dark suits that seemed out of place in our Greasy Spoon diner. They'd sit in the corner booth, order coffee, black, always black, and talk in low voices for exactly 1 hour before leaving. I didn't think much of it at first. People are creatures of habit, after all. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice things. The way they'd fall silent whenever I approached their table. The strange symbols I'd sometimes glimpse on papers they'd quickly tuck away. The fact that they never seemed to age or change, like they were frozen in time. My co-worker, Jake, had his own theories. Government agents, he'd whisper conspiratorially as we watched them leave. Or maybe corporate spies. Either way, best not to ask questions. I tried to follow his advice. I really did. But curiosity has always been my weakness. It was a Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning, I suppose, when everything changed. The diner was empty, save for our mysterious regulars in their corner booth. I was wiping down the counter for the 100th time, half listening to the low murmur of their conversation, when a phrase caught my attention. "The harvest is nearly ready." I froze, my hands stilling on the counter. Something in the way they said it sent a chill down my spine. "Are you certain?" Another voice, lower, urgent. "We can't afford any mistakes. Not after last time." "I'm certain. The signs are all there. This town is ripe." My mind raced. What were they talking about? What harvest? And what did our town have to do with it? Slowly, carefully, I edged closer to their booth, pretending to clean nearby tables. I needed to hear more. And the conduit. The woman this time, her voice cold and precise. "Is it prepared, almost? We'll need one more to complete the circle. Someone. Expendable." A heavy silence fell over the booth. Then, slowly, 4 pairs of eyes turned towards me. I dropped my rag, all pretense of cleaning forgotten. Their gaze was predatory, calculating, and utterly inhuman. In that moment, I knew with bone-deep certainty that these were not people. Not really. I'm sorry, I stammered, backing away. "I didn't mean to interrupt. Can I get you anything else?" The tallest man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "As a matter of fact, you can. Why don't you join us for a moment? We have a proposition for you." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. As if in a trance, I found myself sliding into the booth across from them. Up close, I could see that their skin had an odd, waxy quality to it. Their eyes were too bright, too focused, and when the woman reached out to touch my hand, her fingers were ice cold. "Sarah, isn't it?" she said, her voice silky smooth. "You've been so attentive these past few weeks, always making sure our coffee is hot, never asking too many questions. We appreciate that kind of discretion." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just doing my job, ma'am." The man to her left chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. "Oh, I think we both know you've been doing more than that. Listening, watching, wondering. I don't know what you mean," I lied, my palms sweating. "No need for pretense, Sarah," the tall man said. "We know you're curious, and we're prepared to satisfy that curiosity. For a price, of course." My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure they could hear it. "What? What kind of price?" They exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then the woman turned back to me, her smile razor-sharp. "Nothing too demanding. We just need you to be available when the time comes." "Available for what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "To help us complete our work," the tall man said. "To be part of something greater than yourself. Something that will change this town and the world forever." As he spoke, I felt a strange buzzing in my head, like static on an old TV. The diner seemed to fade away, replaced by visions of impossible geometries, of vast, dark spaces filled with writhing shapes. I saw our town, but wrong somehow. The buildings twisted, the streets running with something that wasn't water. And everywhere, people, my neighbors, my friends, their faces blank and eyes unseeing as they marched towards. I jerked back, gasping, the visions disappearing as quickly as they had come. The four strangers were watching me intently, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. What was that? I whispered, my voice shaking. A glimpse of the future, the woman said. Your future, if you choose to join us. Power beyond your wildest dreams, Sarah. Knowledge that would drive lesser minds insane. All you have to do is say yes. For a moment, I was tempted. The visions, horrifying as they were, had shown me things I'd never imagined possible. But then I thought of my daughter, sleeping peacefully at home. Of our town and all the people in it who had no idea what was coming. No, I said, surprised at the strength in my own voice. Whatever you're planning, whatever this harvest is, I want no part of it. Their expressions hardened, all pretense of friendliness vanishing in an instant. That's unfortunate, the tall man said, his voice now a low growl. We had hoped you would be reasonable. I stood up quickly, nearly knocking over the table in my haste. I think you should leave. Now, before I call the police. They laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Oh, Sarah, the woman said, shaking her head. You still don't understand, do you? There's nowhere to run, no one to call. This town is already ours. As if on cue, the lights in the diner flickered. Outside, I could hear a low, rumbling sound, like thunder, but wrong somehow. Inhuman. I backed away from the booth, my eyes darting towards the door. Could I make it? And even if I did, where would I go? Last chance, Sarah, the tall man said, rising from his seat. The others followed suit, their movements fluid and unnatural. Join us willingly, or... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The threat was clear in their eyes, and the way their forms seemed to shimmer and shift in the flickering light. I made my decision in an instant. I turned and ran, sprinting for the door with everything I had. Behind me, I heard them give chase, their footsteps unnaturally fast. I burst out of the diner into the cool night air, not daring to look back. The street was deserted, the houses dark and silent. In the distance, I could see the water tower that marked the edge of town. As I ran, the world around me began to change. The streets twisted and warped, buildings stretching and contracting in impossible ways. The sky above turned a sickly green, clouds swirling in patterns that hurt to look at. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out. But somehow, I knew it wouldn't be enough. They were coming, and there was nowhere left to hide. Just as I felt cold fingers grasp at my shirt, a blinding light cut through the darkness. Car headlights, coming around the corner fast. I threw myself into the street, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt inches from me. The driver's door flew open, and I found myself face to face with Jake, my co-worker from the diner. Sarah, he said, his eyes wide with shock. What the hell? No time, I gasped, scrambling into the passenger seat. Drive, now. To his credit, Jake didn't hesitate. He floored it, the tires squealing as we tore off down the street. In the rearview mirror, I could see 4 dark shapes standing in the road, watching us go. As we passed the town limits, the world seemed to snap back to normal. The sky cleared, the buildings returning to their familiar shapes. But I knew it was only temporary. Whatever those things were, whatever they had planned for our town, it wasn't over. Want to tell me what that was all about? Jake asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Jake, I said, I think I just uncovered something big, something dangerous. And I don't think we can go back. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a mix of relief and dread. We had escaped, for now. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was only the beginning. The harvest was coming, and somehow I had to find a way to stop it. Story 15. The first scratch came just after midnight, a faint sound that could have been my imagination. But as I laid there in the dark, eyes wide open, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from inside the walls. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't alone in this house, and whatever was in there with me, scratching its way closer, was anything but human. I never should have agreed to house sit for the Hendersons. But when your best friend from college asks for a favor, it's hard to say no. Plus, 2 weeks in a luxurious suburban home seemed like a nice break from my cramped city apartment. It'll be easy, Lisa had said, handing me the keys. Just water the plants, feed the fish, and make sure the place doesn't burn down. She laughed, but there was an odd tension in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. The first few days were uneventful. I worked remotely during the day, enjoyed the spacious kitchen in the evenings, and slept better than I had in years in the plush guest bedroom. It was on the 4th night that things started to get weird. I was up late, finishing a work project, when I heard it. A soft thump, like something heavy falling over. It came from upstairs, in the master bedroom that I'd been specifically told not to enter. My first thought was burglars. Heart pounding, I grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a crystal vase from the coffee table, and crept upstairs. The door to the master bedroom was ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The room was empty. No sign of intruders, nothing out of place. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. A book on the floor near the closet, as if it had fallen from a shelf. As I bent to pick it up, I noticed something odd about the closet door. It was ever so slightly ajar, and from that tiny gap came the faintest whisper of a draft. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the door open, revealing a walk-in closet filled with expensive clothes and shoes. But that wasn't what held my attention. At the back of the closet, behind a rack of coats, was another door. Small, almost hidden, with no handle, just a simple latch. I knew I should leave it alone. This wasn't my house, wasn't my business. But something compelled me forward, my hand reaching for the latch almost of its own accord. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a narrow passageway stretching into darkness. "What the hell?" I muttered, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. The beam illuminated rough wooden walls, a floor of packed earth. It looked old, far older than the house itself. I took a tentative step inside, then another. The passage curved sharply to the left, then began to descend. I could hear something now, a faint, rhythmic sound, like breathing, but not quite. I should have turned back then, should have closed the door, gone downstairs, and pretended I'd never seen any of this. But I kept going, drawn forward by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. The passage opened into a small room, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, overlapping each other in a dizzying collage. But these weren't family photos or vacation snapshots. They were pictures of people sleeping. Men, women, children, all captured in intimate, vulnerable moments of rest. Some I recognized. The mailman, the woman who worked at the local coffee shop, neighbors I'd seen in passing. And there, in the center of it all, a photo of me, fast asleep in the guest bedroom. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a scream. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim lights, I noticed something else. The photos weren't printed on paper. They seemed to shift and move, ever so slightly, like video screens showing live feeds. And behind them, behind the walls themselves, I could hear that sound again. Not breathing, I realized, with growing horror. Chewing, I backed away. My heart pounding so hard, I thought it might burst from my chest. I had to get out of here, had to call the police, had to my back hit something solid, something that shouldn't have been there. I spun around and found myself face to face with a nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to a person ended. Its skin was a patchwork of textures, here smooth as glass, there rough like tree bark. Its limbs were too long, too jointed, bending in ways that defied anatomy. But its face, God, its face. Where eyes should have been were clusters of camera lenses, worry and focusing independently of each other. Its mouth was a gaping maw lined with what looked like typewriter keys, clicking and clacking as if trying to form words. I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the hidden room. The creature's head snapped towards me, lenses focusing with an audible whir. I ran, back up the passageway, stumbling in the dark, my only thought to get away. Behind me, I could hear it giving chase, a cacophony of mechanical sounds and inhuman shrieks. I burst out of the closet, slamming the hidden door shut behind me. Without pausing, I sprinted out of the bedroom and down the stairs, heading for the front door. My fingers had just closed around the doorknob when a thought stopped me cold. My keys, my phone, they were still upstairs. A crash from above made the decision for me. I yanked the door open and ran out into the night, barefoot and terrified. I made it halfway down the street before I realized I had nowhere to go. No phone to call for help, no car to make a getaway. And behind me, I could hear the sound of a door opening. The thing was coming. In desperation, I ran to the nearest house and began pounding on the door. "Help!" I screamed. "Please! Someone help me!" Lights flicked on inside. I heard movement, then the sound of locks being undone. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged man in a bathrobe, his face creased with sleep and confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, squinting at me. "Are you okay?" "Please," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "There's something in the Henderson's house. Something not human. We need to call the police." The man's expression changed, not to one of fear or concern, but recognition. And then, to my horror, a small smile. "Oh," he said, his voice oddly calm. "You found it." My blood ran cold. "What? What do you mean?" He stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. "You'd better come inside. There's a lot we need to talk about." As if in a trance, I followed him into the house. The living room looked normal enough. Family photos on the walls, a TV in the corner. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd about the photos. The people in them seemed off somehow. Their smiles too wide, their eyes too bright. The man settled into an armchair, gesturing for me to sit on the couch. I remained standing, my body tense, ready to run again if needed. "What you saw in the Henderson's house," he began, "is what we call the Watcher. It's been here for, well, longer than any of us can remember." "What is it?" I whispered, not sure I wanted to know the answer. He shrugged. "We don't know, not really. Some kind of entity that feeds on information, I guess you'd call it. On secrets, on the hidden moments of our lives. And you just let it." I couldn't keep the disgust out of my voice. "Let it," he laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "My dear, we don't let it do anything. We made a deal long ago. It stays hidden, takes only what it needs, and in return what?" His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a hunger that mirrored the creature's. "In return, it shares. All that knowledge, all those secrets. Do you have any idea how powerful that makes us?" I backed away, my hand fumbling for the doorknob. "You're insane. All of you." He stood, moving towards me with unnatural speed. "You don't understand now, but you will. The Watcher has chosen you. It's an honor, really." I yanked the door open, ready to flee, but stopped short. The street outside was filled with people. My neighbors, the mailman, the barista from the coffee shop, all standing silently, watching me with those two bright eyes. And there, in the center of them all, stood the creature from the Henderson's house. But it wasn't alone anymore. Others like it moved among the crowd, their camera eyes worry and clicking. "You see," the man said from behind me, "we're all part of it now. And soon, you will be too." As the crowd began to move towards me, their movements jerky and unnatural, I realized the horrible truth. This wasn't just one house, one street. This was everywhere. The walls had eyes, and they were always watching, always hungry for more. In that moment, I knew my life as I'd known it was over. I could run, but where? How far could I go before those unblinking eyes found me again? As the first cold, mechanical hands reached for me, I closed my eyes and silently prayed. Not for rescue. I knew that was impossible now. But for the strength to resist, to hold on to my humanity in the face of this all-consuming hunger for secrets and hidden truths. Because in a world where the walls themselves were alive and watching, the greatest act of rebellion was to keep a part of yourself hidden, even from the all-seeing eyes of the Watcher. Story 16. The moment I saw the townspeople's eyes, I knew something was terribly wrong. They were glassy, unfocused, like dolls' eyes or those of taxidermied animals. But it wasn't until I tried to leave and found every road out of town, inexplicably leading back to the town square, that I realized the horrifying truth. This entire town was part of some twisted experiment, and now I was trapped here too. Another unwitting subject in a study I couldn't begin to comprehend. It was supposed to be a simple job. My car had broken down on the outskirts of Millbrook, a tiny dot on the map I'd never heard of before today. The mechanic, a beefy guy named Tom with grease-stained hands and those unnervingly vacant eyes, had said it would take a few days to get the part he needed. "Why don't you stay at the Millbrook Inn?" he'd suggested, his voice oddly flat. "It's just down the street. Real comfortable." I'd agreed, not having much choice. It was either that or sleep in my broken-down car on the side of the road. The inn was quaint, like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. The woman at the front desk, Martha, according to her name tag, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to Millbrook," she said, her voice carrying the same odd flatness I'd heard from Tom. "I'm sure you'll enjoy your stay with us." As I signed the guest book, I noticed something strange. The last entry was dated over a month ago. For a town on a major highway that seemed unusually quiet. "Not many visitors?" I asked casually. Martha's smile never wavered. "Oh, we get just the right number," she replied cryptically. That night, I tossed and turned in the overly soft bed, unable to shake a feeling of unease. There was something off about this town, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The next morning, I decided to explore while waiting for news on my car. The town was picture perfect, almost too perfect. Neat houses with manicured lawns, a quaint main street with mom-and-pop shops, even a white-steepled church in the town square. But as I walked, I began to notice things. The people, for one, they all moved with the same unhurried pace, their faces set in pleasant but vacant expressions. When they spoke, it was in that same flat tone I'd heard from Tom and Martha. And the conversations, they were odd, repetitive. I'd hear the same exchanges multiple times as I walked down the street, as if the townspeople were reading from a script. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "Oh, yes, just lovely. Not a cloud in the sky. How are the kids? Growing like weeds. You know how it is. Over and over, with only slight variations." By midday, my unease had grown into full-blown anxiety. I needed to get out of here, car or no car. I'd hitchhike if I had to. I started walking towards the edge of town, where I'd seen a "You are now leaving Millbrook" sign the day before. But after 20 minutes of walking, I found myself back in the town square. Confused, I tried again, this time in a different direction. Same result. No matter which way I went, I always ended up back at the square. Panic rising in my throat, I approached a group of locals chatting outside the general store. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm trying to leave town, but I keep ending up back here. Can you tell me what's going on?" They turned to me in unison, their glassy eyes focusing on my face. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of them, a middle-aged woman in a floral dress, smiled that same empty smile. "Why would you want to leave, dear?" she asked. "Millbrook is such a lovely place. I'm sure you'll enjoy your stay with us." The same words Martha had used. Exactly the same. "That's not what I asked," I said, my panic now evident. "How do I get out of here?" Their smiles never faltered, but something changed in their eyes. A coldness, a calculation that sent chills down my spine. Now, said a man in overalls. "There's no need to get upset. Why don't you come with us? We can explain everything." He reached for my arm, his movements suddenly quick and precise, at odds with the languid pace I'd observed earlier. I jerked away, stumbling backwards. "Don't touch me," I yelled, drawing stares from other townspeople. But these weren't looks of concern or curiosity. They were predatory, assessing. I ran until my lungs burned, zigging and zagging through the streets, looking for any way out. But every turn brought me closer to the town square. It was as if the very geography of the place was shifting, herding me back to the center. As I burst into the square for what felt like the 100th time, I saw something that made me skid to a halt. A man in a white lab coat, standing on the steps of the church. He hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. He was different from the others. His eyes were sharp, alert, watching me with clear intelligence. As our gazes met, he smiled. Not the empty smile of the townspeople, but something knowing, satisfied. "Ah," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "Subject 37. I was wondering when you'd figure it out." The townspeople were closing in now, moving with that unnatural quickness I'd glimpsed earlier. I spun in a circle, looking for any escape, but they were everywhere. "What is this place?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. "What have you done to these people?" The man in the lab coat descended the church steps, the crowd parting for him. "This, my dear Subject 37, is the future of social engineering," he said, spreading his arms wide. "A perfectly controlled environment where we can study human behavior, test new methods of, let's call it societal optimization." "You're experimenting on people," I said, disgust warring with terror in my gut. "That's illegal. Immoral," he laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the too perfect square. "Legality is such a fluid concept. As for morality, well, that's exactly what we're redefining here." He was close now, close enough that I could see the name on his ID badge. Dr. Elliot Grayson, project lead. "You see," he continued, "these people aren't suffering. They're happy, productive, free from the anxieties and conflicts that plague the outside world. We've created utopia. They're not people anymore," I spat. "They're puppets, dolls." Something dark flashed in Grayson's eyes. "They're evolving, becoming something better than human. And you, my dear, are going to help us refine the process." He nodded to someone behind me. Before I could react, strong hands gripped my arms. I struggled, but it was useless. These puppet people were inhumanly strong. "Don't worry," Grayson said, pulling a syringe from his coat pocket. "The integration process is nearly painless, and when it's over, you'll be happy. Just like everyone else in Millbrook." As the needle pierced my skin, my last coherent thought was of the real Millbrook. Had it ever existed? Or had this fake town, this twisted experiment, always been here, waiting for unsuspecting travelers like me? The world began to spin, colors blurring and sounds distorting. I felt myself being carried, heard snatches of conversation. Remarkable resistance. Increase the dosage. Perfect subject for the next phase. Then darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was in a white room, sterile and bright. Electrodes were attached to my head, an ivy in my arm. Through a large window, I could see Grayson and other lab-coated figures watching me, taking notes. I tried to move, to speak, but my body wouldn't respond. Panic rose in my throat, but even that felt muted, distant. Grayson's voice came through a speaker. "Good morning, Subject 37. How are you feeling today?" I wanted to scream, to rage against what they'd done to me. But what came out was, "I'm feeling just fine, thank you. It's a lovely day in Millbrook, isn't it?" The words weren't mine. The voice wasn't mine. But they came from my mouth all the same. Grayson smiled, satisfied. "Excellent. And how do you feel about staying with us in Millbrook?" Forever, deep inside, in a part of me that was still me, I was howling in despair. But my mouth, now a puppet like the rest of me, said, "I'd love to stay." Millbrook is such a lovely place. I'm sure I'll enjoy my stay here." "Perfect," Grayson said. "Absolutely perfect," as the lab-coated figures congratulated each other. I retreated into the small corner of my mind that was still free. I knew I had to hold on to it, had to fight against whatever they'd done to me. Because if I didn't, if I let myself fully become like the other townspeople, then the real me would be gone forever. And so, as my body was guided back into the two perfect streets of Millbrook, I began to plan, to resist, to find a way to break free, not just for myself, but for all the other puppets trapped in this nightmare of a utopia. Because somewhere out there was the real world. And no matter how long it took, no matter what I had to do, I was going to find my way back to it. Even if it meant burning Millbrook to the ground. Story 17. The first whisper came just after sunset, a sound so faint I thought I'd imagined it. But as the night wore on, the voices grew louder, more insistent. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow their meaning was clear. We didn't belong here. We had desecrated sacred ground. And now, as otherworldly shapes began to materialize in the mist surrounding our campsite, I realized with growing horror that we might not live to see the dawn. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Just for friends, Mike, Sarah, Alex, and me looking to escape the city and enjoy some time in nature. We'd found this spot online, a secluded clearing in the forest that promised beautiful views and total privacy. The website hadn't mentioned anything about it being an ancient Native American burial ground. Maybe if it had, we would have chosen somewhere else. The drive out was uneventful. We laughed, sang along to old songs, and shared our expectations for the trip. As we turned off the main road onto a dirt track, excitement built in my chest. This was exactly what we needed, a break from the chaos of modern life. The clearing was perfect when we arrived. A flat, grassy area surrounded by towering pines, with a small stream bubbling nearby. We set up our tents, built a fire pit, and cracked open a few beers. Everything felt right. It wasn't until I was collecting firewood that I noticed the first sign something was off. Half buried in the soft earth, I found a small object. Brushing away the dirt, I realized it was a bone human, by the look of it. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Probably just an animal bone, I told myself, tossing it aside. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our campsite, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming earlier, now felt oppressive. The trees loomed over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. "You okay?" Sarah asked, noticing my discomfort. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, just getting spooked by the dark. "I'm fine." We gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. But even as we laughed and joked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so faint it could have been the wind rustling through leaves. But there was no breeze. I glanced at the others, but they were engrossed in Mike's story about a haunted house. They hadn't heard it. As the night wore on, the whispers grew more frequent, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I caught fragments of words, sounds that weren't quite language but still carried meaning. They spoke of trespass, of desecration, of retribution. "Guys," I said during a lull in the conversation, "does anyone else hear that?" They fell silent, listening. For a moment, all I could hear was the crackle of the fire. Then Alex's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, so they could hear it too. I wasn't going crazy. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like an invisible storm. And with them came the mist, creeping in from the edges of the clearing, thick and unnatural. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Now." We scrambled to our feet, but as we turned toward our tents, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shapes were forming in the mist, humanoid figures, tall and ethereal. They moved with a fluid grace that was decidedly inhuman. "Oh my God," Mike breathed. "What are those things?" As if in response, the whispers rose to a fever pitch. The figures drew closer, their features becoming clearer. They wore elaborate headdresses and clothing that looked ancient, yet untouched by time. Their skin was the color of ash, their eyes glowing with an inner light. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You have trespassed on sacred ground," it said, the words appearing in my mind rather than being heard. "You have disturbed the rest of our ancestors. For this, there must be a reckoning." Panic seized me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Beside me, Sarah let out a choked sob. We didn't know," I managed to say. "We're sorry. We'll leave right now and never come back." The figure tilted its head, regarding me with those glowing eyes. "Ignorance is no excuse. The land remembers, even if you do not. You must pay the price for your transgression." The other figures began to move, circling our group. The mist swirled around their feet, reaching out tendrils towards us. "What do you want from us?" Alex demanded, his voice cracking with fear. The lead figure raised a hand, and suddenly, visions flashed before my eyes. I saw this land as it once was, untouched by modern civilization. I saw generations of people living, dying, being laid to rest in this very spot. I felt their connection to the land, their reverence for it, and I understood. We weren't just camping on a burial ground. We were intruders in a place that held centuries of history, of spiritual significance. The visions faded, leaving me gasping. The others looked equally shaken. "You have seen," the figure said. "Now you must choose. One of you must stay, to become part of this land, to join the ancestors in their eternal watch. The others may go, but you will carry this night with you always. You will be bound to protect other sacred places, to warn others away from trespassing as you have done." Horror washed over me as the meaning of its words sank in. They wanted one of us to die, to become whatever they were. "You can't be serious," Mike said, his face pale in the firelight. "We're not choosing one of us to die. That's insane." The figure's eyes flashed. "Then you will all join us. The choice is yours." We huddled together, the spectral figures watching impassively. What could we do? How could we possibly make this choice? "I'll do it," Sarah said suddenly, her voice quiet but firm. "What? No," I grabbed her arm. "Sarah, you can't." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange calm. I felt it in those visions. The peace, the connection to this place. It's not death, not really. It's becoming part of something greater. "Sarah, please," Alex begged. "We'll find another way." But she had already stepped forward, towards the waiting figures. "I volunteer," she said. "Let the others go." The lead figure nodded, extending a hand towards Sarah. As their fingers touched, Sarah's form began to shimmer, becoming translucent. "No," I lunged forward, but invisible forces held me back. I could only watch, helpless, as Sarah's body dissolved into mist, swirling and reforming into a new spectral shape. When it was done, Sarah stood before us, but not as we had known her. Her eyes glowed with the same inner light as the others, her skin now ashen and ethereal. "It's okay," her voice whispered in our minds. "I understand now. Go, live, and remember." The other figures began to retreat, taking Sarah with them. As they faded into the mist, the lead figure turned to us one last time. "Your friend's sacrifice has paid your debt. Go now and honor her choice. Protect the sacred places. Warn others of the price of trespass." And then they were gone, taking the mist with them. The clearing was quiet once more, but it would never be the same. We didn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun rose, we packed our things in silence and left, the weight of what had happened hanging heavy over us. It's been years since that night, but it haunts me still. True to the Spirit's words, I've felt compelled to seek out other sacred sites, to stand guard against those who might unknowingly desecrate them as we did. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can hear Sarah's whisper on the wind. Not a call for vengeance, but a reminder of the responsibility we carry. We went looking for a weekend of fun and found something far deeper, far more terrifying. We learned that the land has memories, that there are forces in this world beyond our understanding. And we learned that every choice, every action has consequences. So if you're planning a camping trip, do your research. Respect the land and its history. And if you hear whispers in the dark, if you see mist where there should be none, remember our story. Because the spirits are watching, and they do not forgive trespass lightly. Story 18. The moment I saw my reflection blink in the antique mirror, I knew this house was more than just another listing. Cold dread washed over me as I realized the stories about 42 Willow Lane weren't just local superstition. The house was alive, hungry, and I had just unknowingly offered myself up as its next meal. As a real estate agent, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that awaited me in this seemingly picturesque Victorian home. I'd been in the business for 15 years, and I'd prided myself on being able to sell just about anything. So when the agency assigned me the infamous 42 Willow Lane, I saw it as a challenge rather than a curse. Sure, the place had a reputation. 5 owners in 10 years, each leaving under mysterious circumstances. Rumors of strange noises, inexplicable cold spots, and things moving on their own. But to me, that was just local color, something to spice up the listing for the right buyer. "You sure you want to take this one, Marge?" My colleague, Tom, had asked when I picked up the file. "That place has a bad history. Might be more trouble than it's worth." I'd laughed it off. "Please. It's a gorgeous Victorian in a prime location. So what if it's got a few ghost stories attached? In this market, that's practically a selling point." Single quotes. If only I'd listened to him. The house looked perfectly ordinary when I pulled up for my first visit. A little run-down, maybe, with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs, but nothing a little TLC couldn't fix. As I walked up the creaking porch steps, keys jangling in my hand, I felt a flutter of excitement. This place had potential. I could feel it. The front door opened with a groan, revealing a dusty foyer. Shafts of sunlight cut through the gloom, illuminating swirling motes of dust. The air was stale, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite place. Musty, yes, but with a coppery tang that made my nose wrinkle. "Hello," I called out, more out of habit than expectation. "Anyone home?" Silence, was my only answer, broken only by the ticking of an unseen clock. I made my way through the ground floor, noting details for the listing. Original hardwood floors, check. Ornate crown molding, check. Grand staircase with intricate balusters, check. Despite its abandoned state, the house's bones were good. With some updating, this place could be a real showstopper. It wasn't until I reached the living room that things started to get weird. As I was examining the fireplace, I felt a sudden chill, as if someone had opened a freezer right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The cold lingered for a moment, then dissipated as quickly as it had come. "Get a grip, Marge," I muttered to myself. "It's just an old house. Probably a draft." But as I turned back to the fireplace, something caught my eye. There, in the layer of dust on the mantel, was a handprint. Fresh, as if someone had just placed their hand there moments ago. My heart began to race. I was sure the mantel had been unmarked when I'd first looked at it. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone hiding in a corner. But I was alone. Or at least, I appeared to be. I quickened my pace after that, rushing through my inspection of the kitchen and dining room. Every creak of a floorboard, every whisper of wind through the eaves, sets my nerves on edge. By the time I reached the second floor, I was seriously reconsidering my decision to take on this listing. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall, its double doors slightly ajar. As I approached, I could have sworn I heard voices, soft murmurs, like a conversation just on the edge of hearing. But when I pushed the door open, the room was empty and silent. It was a beautiful space, with large windows overlooking the backyard and an ornate fireplace along one wall. But what drew my attention was the full-length mirror in the corner. It was an antique, its gilded frame tarnished with age, but the glass was surprisingly clear. I stepped in front of it, smoothing my hair and straightening my jacket. Force of habit. Always look your best, even when it's just you and an empty house. That's when it happened. My reflection blinked. I froze, certain I must have imagined it. Slowly, I raised my hand to my face. My reflection did the same, mirroring my movements perfectly. I blinked deliberately, watching my reflection follow suit. I let out a shaky laugh. "You're losing it, Marge. Letting those stupid ghost stories get to you." But as I turned to leave, movement in the mirror caught my eye. I looked back, and for a split second, I saw something impossible. My reflection was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched literally from ear to ear. And its eyes, they were solid black, like empty sockets. I screamed, stumbling backwards. My heel caught on the edge of the rug, and I went down hard, my head cracking against the hardwood floor. For a moment, everything went dark. When I came to, the room was different. The dust and cobwebs were gone, replaced by rich furnishings and warm lamplight. The bed was made, its covers turned down invitingly. And there, sitting at the vanity, was a woman. She was facing away from me, brushing her long dark hair. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was here. I'm the real estate agent. I was just..." The woman turned, and the words died in my throat. Her face was wrong, distorted, as if I was seeing it through warped glass. Her eyes were too large, her mouth a gash of darkness. "Welcome home," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "We've been waiting for you." I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I had to get out of here. I ran for the door, but it slammed shut, just as I reached it. The handle wouldn't turn, no matter how hard I twisted it. Now. The woman's voice came from right behind me. Don't be rude. The house has chosen you. It's been so long since we had a new friend. I spun around, pressing my back against the door. The woman was there, much closer now, and she wasn't alone. Shadowy figures were emerging from the walls, from under the bed, from the mirror, each one distorted and wrong in its own unique way. What do you want? I gasped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The woman's grin widened impossibly. We want you to stay. Forever. Just like the others. With a jolt of horror, I realized that I recognized some of the faces in the crowd of spirits. The young couple who had owned the house 2 years ago vanished without a trace. The old man who had died here in mysterious circumstances. All of them trapped here, their faces twisted into grotesque mockeries of their former selves. No, I whispered. No, this isn't real. I'm dreaming. I hit my head, and this is just a nightmare. The woman reached out, her fingers elongating into claws. Oh, it's very real, my dear. And you're never waking up. I closed my eyes, bracing for her touch. But instead, I felt a blast of cold air. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the dusty, abandoned bedroom. No spirits, no woman, just the empty house. For a moment, I stood there, gasping for breath. Had it all been a hallucination? A vivid daydream brought on by hitting my head. But as I staggered towards the door, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. There, on my shoulder, were 5 distinct scratches, already welling with blood. And behind me, just for a second, I saw the woman's face, grinning that terrible grin. I ran, out of the bedroom, down the stairs, not stopping until I was in my car, peeling out of the driveway like the hounds of hell were after me. In a way, I suppose they were. I went straight to the agency and dropped the keys on my boss's desk. I quit, I told him. Find someone else to sell that house. He looked at me, concern etched on his face. Marge, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I laughed, a high, hysterical sound. You have no idea. That was 5 years ago. I left the real estate business, left town altogether. But I can't escape the memories of what I saw in that house. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors, I catch a glimpse of something behind me. A distorted face, a grinning mouth. A reminder that 42 Willow Lane is still out there, still hungry, still waiting for its next victim. So if you're house hunting and you come across a listing for a beautiful Victorian on Willow Lane, do yourself a favor. Keep driving, because some houses aren't for sale. Some houses do the choosing, and you really, really don't want to be chosen. Story 19. The moment I realized I'd passed the same mailbox for the 3rd time, I knew something was terribly wrong. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I peered out into the darkness, searching for any landmark that might guide me back to familiar territory. But every house looked the same, every street identical to the last. As panic began to set in, I saw them. Dozens of pale faces watching from windows, all wearing the same eerie smile. With growing horror, I realized I wasn't lost in a neighborhood. I was trapped in a nightmare, and the residents were anything but human. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just a late-night drive to pick up some cold medicine for my daughter. I'd done it 1,000 times before, navigating the quiet suburban streets with the ease of someone who'd lived here for years. But tonight, something was different. It started with a wrong turn. Or at least, I thought it was a wrong turn. I was distracted, worried about Emily's fever, and I must have missed my usual route. No big deal, I thought. I'll just turn around at the next intersection. But there was no next intersection. The road just kept going, winding through an endless sea of cookie-cutter houses, each one perfectly manicured, each lawn a flawless green. Despite the late hour and lack of street lights, I slowed down, peering at street signs. Maple Drive, Elm Street, Oak Lane. All names I recognized, but not in this order, not in these places. My grip on the wheel tightened as I realized I didn't recognize any of these houses. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "You're just tired. You'll find your way out." I turned right at the next corner, hoping to loop back around to a main road. But instead of finding my bearings, I found myself in an identical street. Same houses, same perfect lawns, same eerie stillness. That's when I noticed the mailbox. Number 1313, with a small ceramic cap perched on top. Cute, in a kitschy sort of way. I made a mental note of it, figuring it would help me navigate. 5 minutes later, I passed it again. My heart began to race. This wasn't possible. I'd been driving in a straight line, taking only right turns. How could I be back where I started? I pulled over, fumbling for my phone. The screen lit up, but there was no signal. The map app couldn't locate me. It was as if this place didn't exist. A movement in my peripheral vision made me look up. There, in the window of the house, with the cat mailbox, was a face. Pale, almost glowing in the darkness. And it was smiling at me. I blinked, and it was gone. "You're imagining things," I told myself, but my voice sounded thin and unconvincing even to my own ears. I put the car back in drive, determined to find my way out. I'd lived in this town for 10 years. There was no way I could get this lost. But as I drove, things only got stranger. The houses began to blur together, their shapes seeming to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. And the faces, they were everywhere now. Peering from windows, peeking around corners, always smiling, always watching. I tried to focus on the road, on finding a way out, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The streets seemed to move, to rearrange themselves as soon as I turned a corner. Left became right, straight became curved. It was as if the very geography of the place was changing, conspiring to keep me here. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, I saw something different. A cul-de-sac, perfectly circular, with a small park in the center. Finally, a landmark I could use to orient myself. I pulled into the cul-de-sac, relief washing over me. But as I circled the park, looking for an exit, my blood ran cold. There was no exit. The cul-de-sac was completely enclosed, the houses forming an unbroken circle around the park. That's when I saw them. People, dozens of them, standing on their lawns, all wearing the same clothes. Men in khakis and polo shirts, women in flowery dresses, all smiling those two wide smiles. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop in front of the park. The people began to move, walking towards me with a synchronicity that made my skin crawl. Their movements were too fluid, too coordinated to be natural. Panic seized me. I threw the car into reverse, but it sputtered and died. The engine wouldn't turn over, no matter how many times I tried the key. The smiling people were getting closer. In the harsh glare of my headlights, I could see that something was very wrong with their faces. Their skin was too smooth, too perfect. Their eyes didn't blink, and those smiles, they stretched literally from ear to ear, revealing far too many teeth. I scrambled out of the car, my only thought to run. But as soon as my feet hit the pavement, I knew it was hopeless. Where would I run to? Every direction looked the same, an endless maze of identical houses and smiling not-quite people. "Welcome," they said in unison, their voices a discordant chorus that sent shivers down my spine. "We've been waiting for you. Who are you?" I managed to choke out. "What is this place?" The crowd parted, and a figure stepped forward. It looked like a man, but everything about him was just slightly off. His proportions were wrong, his movements too fluid. When he spoke, his mouth didn't quite sync with the words. "We are the residents," he said, his voice somehow coming from everywhere at once. "And this is our neighborhood. It's been so long since we had a new neighbor." "I'm not your neighbor," I said, backing away until I hit my car. "I don't live here. I'm just passing through." The resident tilted his head, an almost bird-like motion. "Oh, but you do live here now. Everyone who enters the neighborhood becomes a resident. It's been our way for... well, time doesn't really exist here, but it's been a while." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to them. "I'm dreaming. I must have fallen asleep at the wheel." The resident's smile widened impossibly. "I assure you, this is very real. But don't worry, you'll come to love it here. We all do, in the end." The crowd moved closer, their hands reaching for me. I pressed myself against the car, searching desperately for an escape. That's when I saw it. A flicker of something in the park. A gap in reality, like a tear in fabric. Without thinking, I bolted. I pushed through the crowd, their hands grabbing at my clothes, their two wide smiles now twisted into snarls. I ran towards the flickering gap, praying it was a way out and not another trick. As I reached it, I felt a hand close around my ankle. I looked back to see one of the residents, its face now a mask of fury. With a final, desperate lunge, I threw myself towards the gap. There was a moment of disorientation, of falling through nothingness. Then, suddenly, I was back in my car. Back on the familiar streets of my real neighborhood. The clock on the dashboard showed only 10 minutes had passed since I'd left home. My hands were shaking as I drove back to my house, my mind still reeling from what I'd experienced. Was it a dream, a hallucination, or something more? I pulled into my driveway, relief washing over me at the sight of my home. But as I got out of the car, something caught my eye. There, on the curb, was a mailbox I'd never seen before. Number 1313, with a small ceramic cap perched on top. My blood ran cold. I looked up at my house, half expecting to see pale faces watching from the windows. But it was dark, normal. The mailbox was the only thing out of place. As I hurried inside to check on Emily, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped at all. That somehow the neighborhood had followed me home. That it was waiting, patient and hungry, for another wrong turn to bring fresh residents into its endless, smiling streets. So if you're driving late at night and you find yourself in a neighborhood you don't recognize, where every house looks the same and smiling faces watch from every window, don't stop. Don't try to ask for directions. Just keep driving and pray you find your way out before the neighborhood decides to keep you. Because once you become a resident, there's no going back. And that perfect, endless cul-de-sac will be your home for a very, very long time. Story 20. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me like a walla putrid mix of decay and something metallic that made my stomach churn. I'd been hiking alone in these woods for hours, desperately searching for shelter as the sun dipped below the tree line. When I stumbled upon the cabin, half hidden by overgrown vines and gnarled branches, I thought my luck had finally turned. I couldn't have been more wrong. I adjusted my backpack, wincing as the straps dug into my already sore shoulders. The trail I'd been following had disappeared hours ago, swallowed up by the dense undergrowth. I'd pushed on, convinced I could find my way back to the main path. But as the light faded and the shadows lengthened, I realized I was hopelessly lost. The cabin seemed to materialize out of nowhere. One moment I was pushing through a thicket of brambles, and the next, there it was, a squat, wooden structure nestled in a small clearing. Its windows were dark, the glass clouded with years of grime. The porch sagged, its boards warped and rotting. But it was shelter, and with night closing in fast, I didn't have many options. I approached cautiously, leaves crunching under my boots. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and I had to shoulder it open. It gave way with a groan that echoed through the trees, startling a flock of birds into flight. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the gathering gloom. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered me, broken only by the whisper of wind through the leaves and the distant call of a lone bird. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on and sweeping the beam across the cabin's interior. The smell was stronger inside, a clawing miasma that clung to the back of my throat. I fought the urge to gag as I took in my The cabin was a single room, sparsely furnished with a rusted iron bed frame, a battered table, and a few broken chairs. Cobwebs draped every surface, and a thick layer of dust coated the floor except for a set of footprints leading from the door to the far corner. My heart rate picked up. The prints looked fresh, the dust disturbed recently. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "I don't mean to intrude. I'm lost, and I need a place to stay for the night." Again, no response. I moved further into the room, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. That's when I noticed the markings, crude symbols etched into the wood, spiraling patterns that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. They covered every available surface, floor to ceiling, a dizzying array that seemed to pulse in the flickering light. A chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly felt very exposed. I turned, ready to brave the woods again rather than spend another minute in this place, when a sound froze me in my tracks. A soft shuffling, barely audible over the pounding of my heart, coming from somewhere beneath my feet. I swept the flashlight beam across the floor, searching for any sign of a trapdoor or cellar entrance. There, in the corner where the footprints led, a small metal ring set into the floorboards. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it twitch, ever so slightly, as if something below was tugging on it. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The shuffling grew louder, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that raised the hair on the back of my neck. The trapdoor jerked upward an inch, then slammed back down. That broke my paralysis. I lunged for the door, my backpack catching on the frame as I tried to squeeze through. I heard a ripping sound as one of the straps tore free, but I didn't stop to worry about it. I was outside now, gulping in great lungfuls of the cool night air. The woods were pitch black, my flashlight beam creating a small island of light in a sea of darkness. I picked a direction at random and ran, branches whipping at my face and roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I heard the cabin door slam open. Footsteps, Stu, many footsteps pounded the earth in pursuit. Howls split the night, a cacophony of inhuman voices that chilled me to my core. They were gaining on me, these unseen hunters, their cries growing louder with each passing second. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. My flashlight beam caught a glimpse of my pursuers' pale, emaciated figures loping on all fours, their eyes reflecting the light like animals. There were dozens of them, fanning out through the trees, cutting off any hope of escape. I turned back, running blindly now, my lungs burning and my legs threatening to give out at any moment. The trees thinned ahead, and I burst into a small clearing. In the center stood a massive oak, its gnarled branches reaching toward the star-filled sky. With no other options, I made for the tree. I slung my remaining backpack strap over a low-hanging branch and hauled myself up, scraping my hands raw on the rough bark. I climbed as high and as fast as I could, not stopping until the branches grew too thin to support my weight. Gasping for breath, I looked down. The clearing was filled with writhing shapes, circling the base of the tree and clawing at the trunk. In the dim moonlight, I could make out more details of my pursuers, and I immediately wished I couldn't. They were humanoid, but only barely. Their limbs were too long, joints bent at unnatural angles. Their skin was a patchwork of scar tissue and open sores, and their faces were the stuff of nightmares. Sunken eyes gleamed with feral hunger above mouths stretched impossibly wide, filled with needle-sharp teeth. One of them, larger than the rest, approached the tree. It tilted its head back and let out a sound that was part howl, part scream. The others fell silent, their attention fixed on their leader. Then, to my horror, it began to climb. Its movements were jerky but quick, covering ground faster than should have been possible. I scrambled higher, ignoring the ominous creaking of the branches beneath me. The thing was halfway up the tree now, its clawed hands leaving deep gouges in the bark. I reached into my pocket, searching desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around my lighter, a cheap plastic thing I'd bought at a gas station on my way to the trailhead. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The creature was almost upon me now. I could smell its fetid breath, see the saliva dripping from its jagged teeth. With shaking hands, I flicked a lighter. The small flame sputtered to life, and I thrust it toward the monster's face. It recoiled with a shriek of pain and surprise, nearly losing its grip on the tree. Encouraged, I waved the lighter back and forth, trying to keep the creature at bay. It swiped at me with one twisted hand, and I felt white-hot pain explode across my calf as its claws tore through denim and flesh. I cried out, my vision blurring with tears of pain and terror. The lighter slipped from my grasp, tumbling down through the branches. I watched it fall, time seeming too slow as it bounced off limbs and landed in a pile of dry leaves at the base of the tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, miraculously, a small flame flickered to life. The leaves caught quickly, and within seconds, a ring of fire surrounded the trunk. The creatures on the ground howled and backed away, clearly afraid of the flames. The one in the tree with me hesitated, caught between its fear of fire and its hunger. I took advantage of its momentary distraction to break off a dead branch. Gripping it like a club, I swung with all my might at the creature's head. There was a sickening crack as wood met bone, and the monster lost its hold on the tree. It fell, twisting in the air, and landed with a thud in the burning leaves below. Its agonized screams joined the chorus of howls from its companions. The fire was spreading now, racing through the underbrush and leaping from tree to tree. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. I knew I couldn't stay in the tree much longer, but the thought of descending into that inferno was terrifying. A loud crack from above made the decision for me. I looked up to see a burning branch plummeting toward me. I scrambled downward, my hands and feet moving almost of their own accord. The heat was intense, singeing my hair and clothes as I half climbed, half fell through the burning tree. I hit the ground hard, rolling to extinguish the smoldering patches on my jacket. The clearing was empty now, the creatures driven off by the fire. But I could still hear them, their cries echoing through the burning forest. Choking on smoke, I staggered to my feet and picked a direction at random. I ran, ignoring the pain in my leg and the burning in my lungs. Behind me, the fire roared, consuming everything in its path. Ahead lay darkness and unknown dangers, but I kept running, driven by the primal need to survive. As I fled through the burning woods, one thought kept repeating in my mind. What were those things? How long had they been out here, preying on unsuspecting hikers? And how many others, like me, had stumbled upon that cabin in the woods, never to be seen again? I didn't have answers, and I knew I never wanted to find them. All I could do was run, and hope that somehow I'd find my way back to civilization. But I knew that even if I did, I'd never be the same. The horrors I'd witnessed in those woods would stay with me forever, a nightmare from which I could never fully wake. The woods thinned, and I caught a glimpse of lights in the distance, a road, or maybe a town. My heart leaped with hope, but I didn't slow my pace. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being hunted, that those creatures were still out there, waiting for their chance to strike. As I burst from the tree line onto the shoulder of a highway, I allowed myself a moment of relief. But even as I flagged down a passing car, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. It would never be over. Because now I knew what lurked in the dark places of the world, in hidden cabins and forgotten woods. And I knew that no matter how far I ran, a part of me would always be back there, trapped in an endless night, with hunger and death stalking my every step.